I met David when I was a young man, and I started in the family business when I was 21. And when you're 21, you think your parents are going to live forever. And my dad died 3 years later, and I wasn't ready for my dad to die. And I was devastated, and I needed someone to turn to, and I turned to David, and we had many, many talks about how to navigate the ups and downs in business and the economy, and he always gave me wise counsel, and he helped steer me through a very difficult time in my life, and I'll always be indebted to him for that. So I met David as a young man. I was 21 and I started working in the family business, and when you're 21 you think your parents are going to live forever, and my dad died 3 years later, and I wasn't ready for him to die, and I was devastated, and I turned to David for advice and counsel on how to navigate the ups and downs in the economy, and he always gave me, he was very wise, and I'll be indebted to him for that. I would be around David when he would be, with the mayor, and see how he treated the mayor, and then David loved antiques, so sometimes he would have my furniture movers come over to the house when he bought a container of antiques from England, and then I would see how he treated the lowest of the low, guys that were just regular guys that moved furniture that maybe never even graduated from high school, and he was kind and respectful to them, and I was always very impressed by that. So David was running CPI, and CPI was growing into this fantastic company, and my company provided all the business interiors for CPI. So we worked through that for probably 20 years. We had 25 years of working relationship. He was very fair, and he had a great eye for beauty, natural beauty, and good design. He really understood good design and wanted the best for his people and for his employees. He always talked to me about, in the good times, to put money away for a rainy day, because the good times wouldn't last forever, and he always talked to me about having the proper head count at the company, and not being afraid to right-size your company, but do it early and do it once, and get it over with and move on with your best people. David and I both played college soccer. And I remember one time Dave was telling me about some goal he scored at Amherst, and Ann said, "David, Zim doesn't care about that story." But I did care about it. So it was, even when I took my own daughter to visit Amherst, I actually went to the soccer field because I wanted to see the soccer field that David had played on. So that was fun for me to see that. So we, in 1994, we went to the World Cup. It was held in the U.S., and so David and young David and Jim Milligan and a couple others, we went to see Brazil and Sweden play in the quarterfinals of the World Cup and the Rose Bowl, and that was a wonderful trip. And then a couple years later, we went to the Olympics in Atlanta in '96 and saw the track and field, and we saw Carl Lewis win some of his gold medals. So that was a great trip. David was fun to travel with. He was just always upbeat, and he always saw the good side of things and the good in people, and he was a lot of fun to be around. Yeah, I know that, so when I was young, when I was in my early 20s, then I would see how David and Ann were involved with the art museum and helping the city and helping a lot of different causes, so that was inspiring. I saw how he always made time for his family, and I saw he always treated Ann in a loving way, and as a young married person, that was good for me to see. I do remember how excited he got when he came to my office one time, because he was raising money for John Delaney's campaign fund. He was going to make sure that John Delaney was our next mayor. And that's the first time he'd really gotten involved politically, and he single-handedly went around that day, and I think he raised a lot of money and helped got the campaign going. So he was excited, and that was a good thing for the city. So then obviously John Delaney became our mayor for 8 years and did great things in the city, and then later went on to be now as president of University of North Florida. And I know David and Ann have done lots of work out at University of North Florida and put money into scholarships, and who knows how many kids have gotten a chance to go to college because of Ann and David's philanthropy, and who knows how many people they will touch in their lives, and so that could be a very good thing. And David really was the one that made him the mayor. He decided because he was unknown. He was at the state's attorney's office, and David decided that he was going to be a great mayor. And I think when they started, he had 1 or 2% of the votes, and David was the man behind the scenes that made it happen. I just know he was a visionary. I mean, his company ended up more than half the mortgages in the United States were run off the software program. And how's that possible that some small company from Jacksonville, Florida ends up being that powerful? But that was David. David's legacy is going to be between David and God, because when David had his heart attack, he was taking a tour of a hospital in Gainesville, and that's why he survived, because he was in the hospital when that happened. So how's that even possible? So I always thought that, God's love was shining down on David that day, because he had more work for him to do, and so he kept him around, and I'm glad he did. This was, I don't know, 15 years ago. They were touring Shands Hospital in Gainesville, and he had a heart attack while he was on the tour, and so they were able to take him right into the ER because he was there. Otherwise, he would have died. And that's when he lost those fingers, because they put the IV, they were trying to keep him alive, and the nurse put the IV in wrong, and it cut the circulation off to 3 of his fingers, and they didn't realize it for 2 days or something, and by the time they realized it, they had to take the fingers off, which was very hard for him because he was a great tennis player, and he loved playing tennis, and he loved to compete, but he persevered. David was he's the kind of man you want to aspire to be. He was involved in the community, he helped others, he made time for his family, he was loving in his relations with his wife, he always treated her with respect, and he was successful. He didn't let it go to his head, and he took the gifts that God gave him, and he used those to help many, many, many people. I love him. He's a great man.
First time I met David Hicks was in the mayor's office, Mayor Ed Austin, in 1994. Our housing authority was a city department, and it was a tremendous failure. It'd been a failure on the HUD system for at least 12 years before the day I met David. Ed Austin, the mayor, realized that the only way to make the housing program successful was to carve it out of the city government, make it an independent agency, and put a high-powered board in charge of it. That high-powered board was led by David. I met him at the press conference where the mayor announced the formation of the independent agency, the Jacksonville Housing Authority, and submitted David as the chairman. I first met David Hicks at a press conference called by Mayor Ed Austin in 1994. That housing authority was a part of the city of Jacksonville. It was actually a department of the city of Jacksonville. And it was a tremendous failure for the last 12 years preceding this particular announcement. The mayor felt that the only way to make the program successful was to move it out of the city auspices and put it under the auspices of a independent board, and it was led by David Hicks. The press conference was called to name David as that chairman and to set the rules for the new independent authority. The housing authority houses 10,000 families in Jacksonville. 3,000 apartments at that time we owned and operated. Of those 3,000 apartments, 1,000 were offline, meaning they were dilapidated, boarded up, not in use. Another 1,000 were deplorable, but people were in them, and the last 1,000 were okay. The board was new to housing in this sense, new to public bodies, and David's first thing was, we're going to take a business approach, we're going to get this thing fixed, and we're going to get it fixed in record time. I remember an edict, I called it, from David Hicks was, we're going to be a standard performer real quick, and we're going to be a high performer, meaning scoring over 90% in the HUD's report card in 3 years. I said, man, that's kind of impossible. That's a 10-year plan for agencies our size, and they'd be lucky if they can do it in 10 years. And he says, well, we're going to do it in 3, with or without you. That was David. The scoring sheet is on a scale of 1 to 100, and when David took over, we were scoring in the 50s. A year later, we were a standard performer, and meaning you're scoring over 70. And just before the third year, we were scoring 90, which is a high performer, which did put us in the top 10% of agencies in the country. So yes, it was done. It was done through very skillful leadership on the part of David and the board at that time. He made a believer out of people who said it could never be done. He sets high goals. He demands excellence. He accepts no excuses. You give him a task, and it's yours to get done, and it gets done. But I think at the same time, he supports whatever you have to do to get it done. He's there for meetings. He's there for negotiations with high-level officials. And I remember one time we were called into Washington to straighten out a situation, and David called me up the evening we were going, and he says, I don't like flying commercially. It takes too long. We've got to go through stuff. I'd rather save our energy and focus on the meeting. So we ended up taking his plane, going up to Washington, meeting with the federal officials, had a very successful meeting, brought back tons of money, which we needed to fix our properties. And that was just his style. It wasn't taking the private plane. It was the let's focus on the meeting. Let's focus on what we need to do to when we get there. In an effort like that, like I said, the first 1,000 units were offline. So the big job was to get them back in service. That took dollars and dollars and dollars, and along with the planning and how do you make that happen logistically and all of that stuff. If it weren't for David's push, David's willingness to get up and go with us to Washington, David looking federal officials in the face, the money that's necessary would not have been there. In fact, money had been recaptured, and the reason we went to Washington that time was to get them to unrecapture, if you will, that money so that we could spend it, bring our properties up to date. What it means for people is, like I said, we serve 10,000 families, but there are at least twice that many, 3 times that many who need housing. So any unit that's offline that's not available for rental is denying somebody housing. So being able to be at full quota is an important issue, and it's an important score, and it's an important part of the score towards being a high performer. Habitat is a vehicle for that to happen. David was able to take the 2 agencies, and while Habitat was not an arm of the Housing Authority, and the Housing Authority was not an arm of Habitat, but merged some of our goals together so that many of our public housing residents became people on the Habitat for Humanity waiting list. And during that process, the Housing Authority worked with them to get jobs and build credit and do all the necessary things to support a mortgage in the long run. So the tremendous success that was developed in that process is something that we will always remember. I remember that at one point, Housing Authority residents were at least half of the waiting list of Habitat for Humanity. And I remember doing some of the big bills, the 100 bills a year, years that we had, we were able to see significant numbers of our residents move into single-family homes, and that was always a glorious feeling and a wonderful sight. Yeah, I think David and Ann together, and their support for housing, their support for Habitat and Humanity is something that this community will always remember and respect and look up to. It's just a different feel to see people move into their houses for the first time and feel that it's theirs. The smile on kids' faces to know that they've got their own room and they don't have to change apartments, and just the glowing parents saying, "This is mine, I own it, I'm not renting anymore." It's just a wonderful feeling. And I remember that David would be behind every build. He would chair meetings. He'd bring information back. This is what we need to do, and his drive is such that it just corrals everybody around him, and the job gets done. don't know if that was an adventure or just a surprise. I remember David saying he was going to take about 30 people or so, 30, 40 people to the Olympics, and I was one of them. And he said, "You're going to be on the first trip, and we're going to fly there in a plane, and we're going to live in a railroad car." And I'm saying, "How is that going to work?" And you get there, and there's this wonderful railroad car that was our home for a couple of days, and we went to the opening ceremony together, which was wonderful. And we flew back. Another year, when the Super Bowl was in Jacksonville, he says, "I'm going to take 50 people to the Super Bowl. You're one of them. You can't take anybody with you. We're going to have a wonderful time." That was David. So I had to tell my family, we're not watching the Super Bowl together this year. I'm going to be with David. Well, I've always believed in giving back. I think God puts us on this earth to accomplish a mission, and whatever he gives us, he expects us to give some of it back. And they do that in such a magnanimous way. Whether it's the Habitat, the Hicks Scholars, UNF, I mean, they give, and they don't ask for credit. They just do it. David enters battle not expecting to win, but demanding to win. And that's a little different. I mean, you go into battle with confidence, but he goes into battle with victory. He knows it's going to happen, and I've never seen that. I'd like to think I've learned that, but I don't quite think I've got there. Setting high goals. Back to the Housing Authority, where you had what would take most agencies 10 years, he expected it done in 3. And that level of expectation pushed us to where it was, no one thought 10 years. We didn't even think 3 years. Let's get it done tomorrow. So his way of just setting goals is something that not many people can do, because it's not the traditional way, but the support that he gives you behind it is just something that you set goals and then you support. I think I've learned that from him. David walked into the office one day and he knew that I had been a product of public housing, and he says, "What would have helped you when you were growing up in public housing?" And I started thinking, and he says, "Well, while you're thinking, this is what we're going to do." And he told me that he and Ann were prepared to give a certain amount of money to UNF and allow kids from public housing and Habitat to go to UNF if they made the grade. And we sat and talked about it for 15, 20 minutes. And what he wanted from me was to make sure that we could find the kids. And I said, "David, the kids are definitely there. This is an opportunity of a lifetime. We may have to spend some time getting them ready so that they meet UNF's requirements, but they're there." And from that came the Hicks Prep Club, which is a preparatory program that grabs the kids and gets them ready for college. The feeling of a public housing youngster, a public housing person in high school, that college is something that's attainable, is just not there for most of them, or wasn't there for most of them until David provided those scholarships. The scholarship made it possible for them to go to college, study what they want, come out with no debt, and are now graduates giving back to their community the way David and Ann gave to them. And I remember one property we went to that's been torn down and rebuilt since then. We went there, we visited a lady who was blind. She took care of her 2 grandchildren. They were about 10 and 11. The apartment was so bad that as she walked around the house, the apartment, she would guide herself by rubbing her hand across the wall, and the plaster actually was crumbling, and it left ruts in the plaster. And David said, "What the heck are those marks?" And that's what those marks were. I remember one of the kids said that he was going out to visit his friend, and he scooted between me and another board member past David, went to this kitchen sink, and actually crawled up through a hole under the kitchen sink into the next apartment. That was the public housing that David turned around. It's hard to capture that in an interview like this. It's just a different kind of leadership, and it's really, you talk about what will his legacy be. I think decent homes for decent people is the legacy that I'll remember.
Oh boy, I met David in 1967 when I had my first job with Computer Power, his company. And I didn't work directly with him, but when I passed him in the hall, he was always extremely focused on something. And I remember his eyes would be straight ahead, and if he said anything to you, it was good morning, and that was about it. So he was all business, all focus. Well, David is a paradox. He's extremely focused, and that can come across to some people as off-putting, that he might not be as interested in you as a human being as you as part of his business. But that's not the case. I mean, if you look at what he's done in the area of housing, in the area of education, it's clear that he's very interested in other people and he wants to help other people. And that, I spent 30 years off and on with David. And so I think I know really what's in his heart, and it's a deep concern for other people. He just, his personality is not such that always comes out easily. He tends to be a little bit shy. He doesn't force himself on other people from a communications point of view. So, but once you're with him for a while, it's clear that he's trying to do the right thing. David had more of an influence on me than anybody in my life, with the exception of my father. He was so far ahead of his time in terms of how he thought about the business world, how he thought about the people that worked for him, and his whole approach to running a business, that every day I learned something new from him. It wasn't always something that he said to me or something that we did. It was just observing him and really thinking about what he was trying to accomplish. David used to say, management focus is the only asset that we have. And if you're not focused on what you're doing 24/7, you won't be successful. He said that just because you've been successful in one business, which he clearly was, doesn't mean you can do anything. Doesn't mean that you'll be successful in the next business. It's just focusing on that business, trying to achieve what you want to achieve in that business requires complete dedication. I think the primary thing that I learned from David was the importance of focus. He used to say that management focus was the most important asset that we had, that you had to be constantly focused on what you're trying to accomplish in the business if you wanted to be successful. From a technology point of view, and not to get too much into the weeds, cloud computing, as you probably know, is a big thing now, and most of the companies that are going into IT now use cloud computing. We were doing cloud computing in the 70s. The technology was a little different. It was mainframes, not PCs. We didn't have an internet, we did it over telephone lines. But the concept was exactly the same. And David and his partner Lowell Dent understood that having a common processing engine serving thousands of people across the country, across the world, was really the way to be successful. And he understood that 40 years before anybody else. Well, as I said earlier, it's focus, it's a concern for people. For instance, one of the things David did, which was unheard of at the time, and largely still is he shared the profits of that company every quarter with every employee in the company. So if you worked at CPI, you got a check every 3 months for your share of the profits of the company for the prior 3 months. It was like Christmas 4 times a year. And it had every employee focused on how the company could be more successful. It was a model that, frankly, I had never seen before. I don't think was really being used by any large company at the time, nor is it being used today. But it was key to the success of that business.
relationship?
Well, you know, in a way he did. David, we talked together a lot about life. And David always told me that you had to have a passion for something. When you got out of bed in the morning, you had to be looking forward to doing something that advanced that passion. You know, his passion was subsidized housing, affordable homes, after he left the company. His passion has been higher education with the work he's done for University of North Florida. And that's what's kept him charged up in terms of his day-to-day life. And he's exactly right about that. You know, I never knew Ann in the early days. I got to know Ann when I came back to work for David in 1986, 87. And clearly she was a huge part of David's success. I mean, they were so complementary to each other. David could be brash. He would say, you know, more or less what he was thinking, whether or not it might come across well to his audience. Ann was always, now David, you know, and putting a little bit of a buffer out there. So, you know, the times that I've spent with David and Ann, they've been, I mean, they're very clearly a team. And I can't imagine what either one of them would be without the other. He had certain business concepts that were the Holy Grail. And one of them was the way we priced. But most companies back then sold software, and then they charged a little bit every year for the maintenance of that software. David understood that you could not succeed that way long term. And he understood that the only way to be successful long term was to charge based on the number of people using the software in our client companies. So that developed a stream of revenues that helped us keep the software state of the art. That company, still today, is using the same piece of software and the same business model that they were using in 1970, 71 when that product rolled out. It's the longest surviving business anywhere. It's been in existence for 50 years using one software product, modified every year, but basically one software product and one business model for pricing. No company anywhere in the world has been able to come close to that type of record. Yeah, I was a partner with Arthur Anderson. I was a CPA. And one of David's early partners in the company was my father, who was a CPA. He was an owner. He wasn't active in the company. And so our relationship went way back to the 60s. So when I started thinking about doing something different, I went and talked to David. And David felt that he had a need for someone that had fairly high-level financial ability to help him take the company where it needed to go, and particularly thinking about down the road where there might be an acquisition or another chain of acquisitions, which in fact there were. And so I played that role. I wasn't the day-to-day chief financial officer, but I was more of a strategic financial advisor to David. Well, take this street out here, Riverside Avenue. 30 years ago, it was a 2-lane road all the way to the downtown area. It was blighted. Most of the businesses were shut down. When this was about 1988, 89, we were thinking about moving the company to the suburbs. It saved us a lot of money. We'd had a brand new facility. The facility we were in was pretty old. David said, look, if we move out of this area, it's going to be the end of Riverside Avenue. Whereas if we stay and we make investments, we can be the beginning of a renewal of this area. And he went to the state and had them finance the reconstruction of the street into 2 lanes. They put in palm trees down the middle. They really did all those things that set the stage for this area's renewal. And that's what's happened. That's just one of the things that his vision resulted in terms of Jacksonville. leave aside all of the charitable activity that he's been involved with, United Way, we were always the largest per capita contributor to United Way the whole time David was with the company. The housing projects that he was involved with, the Hicks scholars at University of North Florida. It just goes on and on. I mean, David's touched the lives of thousands and thousands of people in Jacksonville. I think David's legacy will be as an innovator, although it's hard for people outside of the business sphere that he operated in to really understand the types of things I've been talking about and why those were so important and why those were so far ahead of their time. But I think he'll be viewed as a real innovator. I think he'll be viewed as a humanitarian, as a benefactor to, as I said, thousands of people in Jacksonville and elsewhere. And I think he'll be viewed as a tremendous family man. I mean, the Hicks family, when you look at it, it's hard to think of another family that's produced so many family members that have been hugely successful in almost anything they've attempted to do. That's really remarkable.
Well, I grew up in Avondale and Ann lived in Ortega, and I used to see her at little girl birthday parties, and Ann was always the most beautifully dressed. But what I really loved were her long brown braids and satin ribbons. And then later, we went to summer camp together when we were 12, and that's when we became friends for life. School was very challenging but fun. Ann excelled at everything. She was on a roll, editor of the Live Oak, had the lead in every play and operetta, and of course was president of the student council. After college, we came back here and we had weddings and children, and then began our volunteer work. Ann, of course, led the way. She was always very involved and very much the leader of whatever she was doing. She's just a natural leader, and her delightful personality makes her especially fun to work with. Oh, Ann and I really didn't do so much together. We were both in the junior league, but I was just a member. She, of course, was president. She did many things in our community besides the junior league, and I couldn't even name them all for you, but the Jacksonville Library. She was on the boards of both Bartram School and Bowles School, and of course, very involved with UNF. And she just has given so generously of her time, talent, and treasure. Everybody would like to be with Ann. Well, Ann's just always been totally open, honest, fun. I don't see any changes unless she's gotten better. Our fathers were friends, and Ben and Bob kept Ann and me in horses, and we rode a great deal out at the driving club in Orange Park, which is now the interstate, and our dads trailered the horses all around the southeast, and we were in horse shows, and we just had lots of fun with our horses and our dads. Ruth and Ben were Ann's parents, and they were older parents for Ann, but they were devoted to Ann and just took beautiful care of her and made sure everything was just right for Ann. we had played a lot of bridge in college, and then we got too busy. But later in life, Ann's mother, Ruth, who was a master bridge player herself, decided we should start again. So every Monday afternoon, we go down to Ruth's house for bridge lessons. Well, one afternoon, suddenly Ann throws the cards across the table and says, "I know now why I can't sleep at night. It's this bridge." And I want you to know now, we don't even know how many days a week Ann is playing bridge, and she is sleeping like a baby. Well, I think, Ann had grown up here, and she loved the arts and the education and the music, and she's, as I say, she's very smart and full of energy, and she just wanted to do what she could to make it better for her community. So she just got into everything that really interested her and worked hard and did a splendid job, I would say. They've just worked hard as a team and separately too, and been devoted to the programs and to our city, and they've certainly made it a better place. What have I learned from Ann? Oh, I couldn't possibly tell you all the things I've learned from Ann. I am so blessed to have had Ann as my friend for all these many years, counting 67. And I'm wishing Ann a very, very happy birthday and much love, Petrish. Ann was at Mount Holyoke and David was at Amherst when they met, and then they got married and went off to Harvard Business School, and I was very afraid that we'd lost Ann, but David brought her back to all of us, and we love Ann and David. He's been a delightful friend as Ann, and we've enjoyed, our husbands had played a lot of tennis together, we'd done family things together, and it's just a very happy couple, and our children are all good friends, and Ann and David have had a very, I'd say, fun, interesting life together.
We were going on a trip through the museum for some of our benefactors to the Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. So I boarded a plane with Ann and a bunch of her friends, aka a lot of old ladies, and off we went to Arkansas for a great trip and the beginning of a wonderful friendship. There's that look that's only Ann Hicks, and it is just, it says so much about her, and I'm struck by the Ann Hicks look every time I see her, to be quite honest. It says sophisticated and sincere, and just is kind of the epitome of a great woman. Yes, Deborah is very much Deborah's style, Deborah's qualities. There's a precision to Ann, just like clearly there is to Deborah, and to David and Poppy, and they're all so unique. But that family is just a really special family to me. She has raised 3 incredible children that have each made such significant contributions in their own right. And that is, when I always reflect on Ann and David, that is really one of the things that impresses me the most. Sure, their gifts are numerous, but what they have raised and created in terms of this family is just so impressive, inspiring, and something I would hope to try to do one day myself. Ann is one of the smartest people I know. And don't ever let her fool you from that perspective. But she's always asking questions, she's always reading, she's always researching, and always exploring. And so that's an inspiration to me, to a woman that has, a great foundation, but yet is as excited and inspired about the future as she has learned about the past. It's no surprise that Anne's passion is really education and higher education. Her work at UNF is really inspirational, but I think her interest in the community's betterment in general speaks so much to the well-rounded person that Anne is. She is, of course, one of the most ardent supporters of the Comer, not just with the traditional ways that she can give, but with her voice and her excitement and her passion for what we do here at the museum, and that has been a tremendous gift to us. It's one of those things that we know when we have Anne and David behind us, we're going to be all right. And I think that spirit kind of prevails to so many organizations in this town. They know that if you have the Hicks on board, even if it's just conceptually, you're going to be okay. It means two really smart people have thought a lot about what you've asked of them and are going to make a really significant impact. I would say they're both CEOs, if you will. They're both creators. They are always driven, and while I didn't have the good fortune to know David during the prime of his business career, I can only imagine what he was like as a leader, and I see that same leadership quality in Anne and everything she does. She might be the CEO of her household, of her circle of friends, of her family, and that's really inspirational to me. She really leads with a great deal of passion and precision, and that's really a special gift. When you're able to lead by example and be public about your philanthropy, about your community service, about your passions, it inspires others. And I think the fact that David and Anne have said it's okay to be public about our success and our interest in our community's success. It's also a good housekeeping seal of approval. I mean, you drive by somewhere, and if you see a Hicks name on the side of a building or on a roster of board members or list of donors, you know that institution is really worthy. Certainly, the Comer Museum has benefited from the Hicks family and their generosity. But also, I know that the Ronald McDonald House has been fortunate enough to enjoy their generosity. Habitat, the University of North Florida, certainly the Cathedral Arts Program, and numerous others. Working with them is always fun and comfortable. You know you need to be prepared because you know there'll be tough questions. But it is always one of those experiences that leaves you wanting more at the end. And every time that I've left Anne or David or their collective company, I've always been thinking about, well, what's my next time that I'm going to get to be with them? One of my funniest memories of Anne was early on in our friendship when I taught her how to use Uber. And she was just really amazed until this black car shows up, and she said, "We're getting in a car with a stranger?" And I said, "Yes," and off we go. And about 2 years later, she whipped out the Uber app. She was with Deborah, actually, and off she jumped in an Uber X because she thought that was more the way that she needed to travel, and that the drivers were a little more interesting. One of my favorite things about Anne is her zingers and her quick wit. And she has a way of smartly integrating them into conversations at just the right point. We don't have time enough to really talk about their legacy. If you think about the families that have benefited because of the businesses that they have created, when you think about the countless individuals that have benefited from their charity, I think you really have to kind of almost step back and say, these people have created a better Jacksonville, or certainly had a really big part in that. They've advocated for what was right. They've helped people improve their own situations. They've allowed people to prosper. And they've done it with a smile and grace and generosity all the way through.
That's great. How do
I think Ann and David both have such a deep understanding of a broad set of topics and subject matter that at their core they probably know where they want to focus. They've had a lot of great life experiences. They've had a lot of great business experiences. And I think that probably, even though philanthropy is a most private process and decision, that's probably influenced that a lot. But I think, like I said earlier, they're so learned and they're so open to listen that I've got to believe they're informing themselves every day of what are the needs and what are the opportunities. And then, yes, the right person needs to come ask for the right reason. But I know they're right there, willing and waiting. I think they're aligned. Some teams work well together because they play off each other's differences. But I think there is such respect for each other that that unified front makes them so coordinated, so thoughtful, so passionate about their work. And since there's that mutual respect for each other's interests and passions, I think at the end of the day, when you're getting Ann, you're getting David, and vice versa, and there could be no better combination. Ann is really curious, and she's so interested, not just in subjects, but in people. And I think that was the basis of where our friendship started. I think I was as much a curiosity to her as I was an interest. And I think what she showed me and how she could take interest in somebody that was completely different from her and relatively unknown to her, and learn and develop what I would call, and I think she calls, a really good friendship. That's taught me a lot of lessons, and I think I'm not the only person that's benefited from that type of relationship with Ann.
Because you said that when she met you.
I think that the passion that Ann and David have brought to the table, that I've only had the fortune of knowing for just a few years, and I know has been around for many years, is not just impressive and inspiring, but it really shows that there's no age that you need to stop. They could easily say, we've had our impact, we've done our work, we've made our friends, we've built our family, but clearly they haven't, and they never stop that drive and that passion to continue to build in each of those areas. And I think that's a great takeaway from the Hicks.
Great.
I've known Ann forever. I can't even remember when we first met each other. We grew up together as much as either of us has really grew up, but we spent a lot of time together in the early days. And I would go over for visits to her house. And as I would walk up the driveway, they had a housekeeper who was kind of an austere New Englander named Mrs. Conrad. And she wintered with Ann's parents, Ruth and Ben Curry. And we were never really sure whether she worked for them or they worked for her. But she would see me coming up the driveway, and reportedly she would turn to Ruth and say, "Oh, Lord, I got to go make up the other bed." She never leaves in the same day, and I don't think I ever did. I've known Ann forever. We grew up together as much as either of us has growed up, but we spent an awful lot of time together. I would go over to her house. We didn't call those play dates in that day, but we certainly went over for a good time. And Mrs. Conrad, who was a very austere New Englander who wintered with Ruth and Ben Curry, Ann's parents, and we were never sure whether she worked for them or they worked for her, but evidently she would see me coming up the driveway and she would turn to Ruth and she would say, "Oh, Lord, I got to go make up the other bed." She never leaves in the same day, and I never did. Gracious, the things I've treasured about Ann over the years are certainly a keen intellect, a very loving heart, and just a wicked, fabulous sense of humor. Well, she certainly has been very active with the Cummer Museum. She's been very active in a number of other arts organizations, primarily arts organizations. And then, of course, the real love of her life, and as she's gotten into this later part of loving things, has been the University of North Florida. Well, she met him at Mount Holyoke, and although she says she hated Holyoke, certainly one blessed thing that came out of it was David. David was at Amherst, which was just over the hill from Mount Holyoke, so there was a lot of back and forth. We all went over to Amherst. We went to Williams. We went every place we could because we were what they call now suitcase school, which meant you on Monday and Tuesday you got over the weekend. On Thursday and Friday you got ready for the next one. So we stayed and studied on Wednesday, but we spent a lot of time with David and with the guys at Amherst. I think they balance each other so well. It's like a seesaw. I was thinking about that. Ann's strengths lift David up, and his strengths lift her up too. And then sometimes when they need a little pushing back, the other side comes into play. So it's a very fine balancing act. One of the things I've always treasured about Ann is the fact that she is there for her friends in emergency situations, once again, full of love. When we were at Mount Holyoke, she accused me of locking my closet every time I went down to New York so that she couldn't borrow my little black dress. I don't remember that, but could have been true. We briefly shared a beau. I don't think either one of us cared much about him, but his name was Ernie Franklin, and he was from Princeton. And he didn't understand how our dormitories were set up because he would call Ann on the 3rd floor and ask her out, and if she said no, she couldn't go, he would just get transferred down to the 2nd floor where I was. And we always knew the call was transferred, whether it was going 2nd to 3rd or 3rd to 2nd. So that always gave us a good giggle. I don't know that Ernie ever found out about it. Well, briefly, we shared the same beau. I don't think either one of us really ever cared much about him, but it was kind of a funny thing. His name was Ernie Franklin, and he was from Princeton. And he didn't understand how the dormitories were set up. So he would call Ann on the 3rd floor, and if she couldn't go out, then he would get transferred down to the 2nd floor where I was. But we always knew the call was being transferred, whether it went 3 to 2 or 2 to 3. So we got a good giggle out of that, and I don't remember how long he lasted, but he gave us a lot of pleasure. Well, in addition to all of her wonderful civic endeavors, I think of somebody who's just a pile of fun because she brings that joy to every endeavor and to every activity. Well, I think her legacy, first of all, is going to be those wonderful children that she and David have produced. And then I think the things that Ann has started in our city, certainly the Cummer Ball, which benefits this fine museum, and probably most of all the University of North Florida. She and David took that on as a cause in a way that's been so important for our city because, as I think they both believe, you can't really have a great city unless you have a great university. Because Ann and David really both believed and have lived through the belief that you can't really have a great city unless you have a great university. And it's with such pride that we see everything that's going on at the University of North Florida. I go out there and take classes and get charged up every time I walk into the campus. Well, I would certainly like them to know how much I love both of them and what an important part they've been in my life. And then I'm counting on us going on and having fun forever because we have neighboring plots out at Evergreen Cemetery, enter through Gate 5. And although we'll be underground, I think the joy and revelry will continue.
I think I first met Ann in church. I noticed this elegant woman sitting there in the pew and greeted her after the service and noticed that she was very gracious, very intelligent. I think I wanted to take her out to lunch to get to know her, and we hit it off right away. She's a beautiful woman and so smart and full of integrity, and I was eager to learn all of the things that they're doing. They both are such great philanthropists and generous hearts, and they love this city. So I really felt like I was getting to know Jacksonville when I got to know Ann and David. Well, Ann went to school up north, like I did, to one of the 7 sister schools. So we connected on that. David went to Amherst. Also, I went to Vassar. So we had a lot to talk about from the beginning. They've been very involved in Habit Jacks, which is a program that was birthed from the cathedral. And so I wanted to know all about how they got involved, why they felt that was so meaningful. Anne is also very religiously interested, not just from a faith perspective, but she's actually studied religion quite a bit. So we just had a lot to talk about. She, in fact, took me to visit one of her professors, a very old man who was fascinating, who's been studying religion his whole life. So we just had so many common interests that we hit it off right away. Anne has a very deep spiritual life. She's open to learning about all different faiths. She's open to questioning, but she also believes deeply in God and believes, I think, profoundly in the fact that she is called to do good for others. So she's always sort of thinking about what can she do, how can she help. In fact, sometimes I would worry about her because she's such a caretaker that, when is Anne going to get time for Anne was one of the questions that I wondered about. But she is just someone who's always looking at the world from the perspective of how can I make it better? What is God calling me to do with my life? And I think David is similar. He's much more of a rational thinker in his faith, but he also is always looking for those places where he can really make an impact and lift people up. And I think that's one of the reasons why Habajacks was so good for them, is I think David really believes that if you can give people a home, you can lift them out of the sort of cyclical poverty in which they just can't get out of it. If they have their own home, the rest of those pieces begin to fall into place. And I think he's right on that. Some of the best marriages are really interesting because they're often marriages of individuals who are very different from one another. And Anne and David are very different. They are constantly challenging one another, but also supporting one another. They live in a kind of a depth of love that comes from many, many years of marriage. But you can see them. They will honestly disagree with one another, wrestle with items. When you go to their house, David's always got a bunch of papers out. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, he's got books. And so they're talking about current issues, and they're not afraid to challenge each other on them. I mean, I think they keep each other sharp. Intellectually and spiritually, which is wonderful. Many married couples just sort of coexist together and comfort each other. But Anne and David, they challenge each other, and that's a wonderful thing. They have an extraordinary family. I mean, such incredible children and grandchildren, incredibly bright, succeeding in life. It's just fun to watch their grandchildren grow up. They're so talented, and they just take such joy in their children and grandchildren. They're very proud of every one of them. It's so fun to be a part of a wedding or a family celebration because there's just so much success, but also it's interesting. There's some competition, which I'm familiar with being from New England, but there's also a lot of love and support and celebration. So, they've produced some extraordinary offspring, and they must have done something right.
Thank you.
They've inspired people because they've been very successful, but they've translated their success into the common good. They haven't just enjoyed their success, they've used it to serve the community, and they've done that in a rather quiet way. They will allow themselves to be acknowledged, but they don't toot their own horn. They're just out there quietly doing and giving and serving and being a part of the community. And that speaks volumes, especially when a couple has lived in a city for a long time and been investing in it for years. There's just this quiet model of commitment and discipline and generosity. And that inspires people. People want to be like them. Well, our university here, UNF, is thriving, and they have had a large part to play in that. And that university affects the city in so many ways. The Habajacks program here is the largest Habitat for Humanity program in the nation, and they've been a huge part of that growth and that success. They're pivotal members of this place. People notice when Anna's here, when she's not here, when David's here. They just want to know they're around because they're considered what I call pillars of the community, pillars of the church. By pillar, I mean the community sort of rests on them. They look to them for stability, for leadership, for commitment. And at the same time, if they don't feel well or they're not there, everybody worries because we need the pillar, it holds us up. Oh, I've learned many things. I've learned about faithfulness in marriage. I've learned about depth of commitment. They really enjoy being generous. They celebrate that. They are so intellectually curious. Many people, as they age, kind of dull in their intellectual curiosity. Anne and David do not dull. They are constantly inquiring about what's happening today, politically, across the world. And I want to be like that when I get older. I want to be constantly questioning, wondering, still thinking, how can I help the world become a better place? Anne is a lover of people. She connects deeply with people and has a lot of really deep friendships and relationships. She's a caretaker. She wants to know how everyone is doing. She wants to know how she can help them. She's also a person of deep faith and intellectual pursuits, which for her are one and the same. She really enjoys learning about God and learning about religious faith. So, Anne is a lover of life and a lover of people. Anne loves people. She loves connecting at a deep level. The first time I met Anne, she was seated in a hospital room, but she wasn't in the hospital. One of her friends was. And I came to say a prayer with one of her friends, and she was sitting there, and she was sitting there when I got there, and she was sitting there when I left. She was just staying there to make sure her friend was okay. That's very much Anne. Caring for people, sometimes just quietly, making sure they have what they need, thinking about them. And she has a depth of spirituality, and her intellectual life and her faith life are very in close relationship with one another. She's a caretaker. Anne and David built lights to light up this cathedral at night. They decided that we needed to be lit at night, not only because the building is architecturally beautiful at night, the stonework looks beautiful, but for safety's sake. They wanted to make sure that the people going in and out of the cathedral would be safe at night. So they lit us up. And I think that's what they do. They light up the community by calling certain issues into people's consciousness, by lifting up education, calling attention to our housing crisis. So because of Anne and David, we're going to have consciousness in certain areas that's heightened because they've lit those areas up for us. They just model a level of commitment to the community that is extraordinary. And that kind of commitment, I find it's interesting, it goes on and on and on. So even after Anne and David are gone, I'm sure the ripple effects of what they've done and what they've contributed to will continue to expand. Well, they live in this beautiful home. So you come in, and Anne's usually found some extraordinary kind of tea that I've never tasted before. And David is so sharp. He asks these questions. You really have to make sure you've read your newspapers before you visit with David. And they have this banter that they will do back and forth with one another. So it's just fun to be around them and listen to them converse with each other and with me. I just enjoy. They make me think, both of them. They make me think. Every couple, as they age, one of them struggles with health issues first. In this case, it's been David. And they've also modeled for us how to work through difficult times in a marriage. Anne has cared for him beautifully. She's also, though, managed to go out and be with her friends some, be with her family members. She's kind of modeling for us a balance, which I think sometimes she does caretake almost too much, and I worry about her exhaustion. But, that is an incredible thing to do, to remain active in the community when your spouse is struggling more physically, to be open about that too. David is very open about his physical ailments, his depression. He's very open about that. And I think that's also liberating for this community and for this nation, because we've had so much shame associated with those kind of ailments. And he doesn't have that. He's open about that. He's extremely smart, extremely successful, and openly aging and struggling with that. And I think we need to see that, because we're all going to be there at some point. And so I don't know if he realizes that, but he's role modeling for us how to do that gracefully. And so is Anne. I mean, they're showing us it's not easy, but they're working through it together. They're being open about it. Their family loves them. They love their family. What more could you ask for? Eventually we're all going to struggle with something. Our bodies don't last forever. So they're doing it in a way that role models it for the rest of us, so that we're not so afraid and we don't hide.
Well, I met her through my husband, who was a friend of hers before I was, and we got married 37 years ago. So I was introduced to her through him about 37 years ago at probably a party, and then it just continued from there. She is outstanding, obviously, because that's why we're all here, but she is very bright. Her brain is amazing, a right brain, I might add. And her heart, she's got a big heart. But the best part about Anne, in my view, and what makes her so compelling as a friend, is she has a huge funny bone. She loves to laugh, she loves to have a good time, and she can draw anybody out. So she just has the personality and charisma that goes along with the big brain and the big heart. You know, she's really good. She's very smart, and she is very creative. As I said, she's a right brain, and she can write beautifully. She's really a poet, but she doesn't tout that. And she's a beautiful artist. And that's one of the things that we did together that was special to our relationship, is we painted together, and we would schlep these paint-laden suitcases out to UNF twice a week to classes with Louise Freshman Brown, mainly for her to tell us that we were good, and we'd get involved in classes and with the other young people that were students, really, and we were the old ladies in the class, and so we would love that, and she would just be, you know, interacting as we all would with all the people. It was really fun. You know, the painting was very important to us at that point, and we did workshops and we did trips and things like that. And one thing that we loved we did a workshop in Venice with Louise, and that was really just such a fun memory for us, because we were staying in a converted convent, and she and I were staying in these little nun cells. I mean, we had a little bed, a bathroom that was like something you'd see on a train maybe, and a window. Actually, Anne didn't get a window, I did. It was pretty minimal. And so by the end of the week, we were just loving our little cell. It was all ours, and we had just bonded with all these goofy people from all over the place and had the best time. She has always had an eye for beauty, and so she always loves beautiful people and beautiful things and beautiful settings, and so her paintings by and large are just beautiful. They're like flowers, and they're like beautiful marsh scenes and scenery and things like that. But one thing that she painted in Venice that she has painted since in Vail was laundry hanging on a line, and the beautiful visuals of these, you know, windows with this fresh laundry on these sweet lines. It was just so appealing, and she did a beautiful job of that. I'm not sure she's ever hung a piece of laundry on a line, but that's okay. They are charming. And so she's done that in Venice and in Vail, and I don't know where all else, but if you see one, you would love it. It's really sweet. That's great. Was it oils or?
She's very funny, and that she's very smart and very creative and all those things, and is just always up for some fun adventure. She loves reading. She loves, you know, movies. She loves people. She's definitely an extrovert. She is a monophobe, like my husband. They don't like to be alone. And she loves to be just out there interacting with people. It's going to be huge, and it's going to be bigger than I can really address, because the people that have worked with her at UNF, and the people that have worked with her at the Cummer, and the people that have worked with her on different various boards have seen her really working to, you know, do the best with what everyone has for that organization. Yes, we've traveled a lot. We've done a lot of girls' trips where we go and do plays and
wonderful dinners until we're just, overfed and overstimulated, and then we come home after a 4-day weekend in New York, which is wonderful. And we have traveled with a lot of couples on house parties, and I'm sure that people have mentioned that Ann and David have this lovely home in Mayfair in England that they share with Deborah and some others. And we have had fabulous, weeks in London with Ann and David, and it's just been a lot of really quality, fun travel through the years. It really has. One trip that we took, which was sort of like the last trip that we did in the mode of young people, is Ann and David and Steve and I, my husband, Steve and I, we went to Corsica, and we did not have a travel agent. We did not have a itinerary, really. We had talked to another friend's son who vacationed there. He lived in Paris, and so we got over to Corsica and we rented a car, and we batted around that island for a week and went all through the middle and the hills and the little towns and the little towns on the edge. And it was just really fun because it was just the four of us in a van with no one telling us what we were supposed to do or where we were supposed to go eat. And we would find these random little places that we would just fall into. And that doesn't happen that much anymore. We've gotten more careful and serious with our travel, and we've all gotten older. So that was really a fun memory of us batting around Corsica, just being young in a car, in a van, goofing around. So that was a great memory. The reason that Ann and David make such a great team is because they're yin and yang. They are right brain, left brain. They are the perfect complement. He can make anything happen in the business world. He is focused, he's dedicated, he's brilliant. But she is like his front man. She can go out there and, network and make friends and do all the stuff that David, who's an introvert really, Ann's the extrovert, really doesn't care about. He wants to get things done and do a wonderful job at it. And she is the sort of softening agent, shall we say, that kind of, they're just a perfect complement. They really are. One of the things that Ann and I did together was we took classes at North Florida, University of North Florida, with this retired Episcopal priest who was also a professor, and he taught philosophy and religion. And he and Ann formed a bond early on, and she started a chair at UNF in his name. So they got to be really close. And after he retired, he started a book club, and Ann invited me to come into the book club. And it was one of the most interesting things any of us have ever done. There were only 5 women, and Father Neil Gray, who I'm referring to, and his beautiful friend Colette, and we would meet and we read everything. We read philosophy, and we read religion, and we read poetry, and we studied the religions of the world and the mystics. And I mean, it was quite comprehensive and just fascinating. And I can truly say that the only thing that Ann probably has ever failed at is meditation. We really tried, but we could not meditate. We couldn't still our minds. But that was one thing that came out of this world religion theme, is that, it's very helpful and very sort of ingrained in a lot of these religions that we studied, that you have to calm your mind and meditate and, those kind of exercises. And we just could not get there. But other than that, it was just an amazing, amazing thing.
Yeah. They were among the first couples we met when we moved to Jacksonville some 55 years ago, and have been great friends ever since. We've known them socially, we've traveled with them. I've done business with David, all very successfully, and they couldn't be a grander, warmer, more thoughtful couple. And it's been a terrific friendship over 5 decades.
I can remember when Deborah was born, and they lived right across, kind of around the corner from us, but right across this little house they'd moved to. And Deborah, by the time we got over there one Sunday afternoon, Deborah was about 5, I think. Well, I mean, I saw her before, but she's 5 at this point. Wonderful blonde hair, beautiful child. And David was sitting there. I have this photographic picture of David and this precious Deborah. And she walked up to him and put her arms around him, and he put her arms around her. And I thought, what a wonderful father, and he has been. He's been a wonderful father to all 3 of those children.
Our children and their children have been great friends growing up. Poppy and Rustin were in each other's wedding. David and young Preston were good friends for many years and still remain so. So it's been a relationship at least 2 generations and probably 3.
They have both given to our community in substantial ways of themselves, monetarily, and we are a better community because they live in it. Thank you, Ann and David.
David's very smart, very thoughtful, quick to make decisions, and easily understood. He is quite articulate and direct with his thoughts and interests, and that's a great pleasure to have someone of that intelligence and articulateness to express ideas and thoughts and directions.
But he also has another generosity. He has involved his friends in startup businesses that he got involved in, and frankly, helped his friends. They were all very successful, each of the businesses, and that's just one of the many ways of David giving back in his quiet little way. But he's been honored, thank God, for many things.
After successfully launching and growing CPI, David became a bit of a venture capitalist and invested in a number of enterprises, including banks, a personal storage company in London, and a number of other enterprises, all of which were very successful. But in all of those, he asked his friends to become shareholders or partners in the venture. And I can tell you that David Hicks has made a lot of people a lot of money, myself included. We were all pleased to have been partners in those ventures, and he was very generous in bringing us all on board.
To me, they're both icons and to our community, and I would say, if anything, they've taught us that giving is more important than getting, because they have been giving of themselves, of the talents that they have, which are many, and of their monetary wealth. So,
David has set a great example in public service as well. He, for many years, was head of the Housing Authority and really put that institution back onto its feet. He led Habajacks. Habajacks is the Habitat for Humanity in Jacksonville, and he raised a lot of money, set some very important goals, and achieved them all. His leadership in Habajacks was a reflection and extension of his chairmanship of the Housing Authority. A lot of people low-income people have very nice housing as a result of David's leadership of those 2 institutions.
truth.
Well, they're both very smart, both beautifully educated, both from wonderful families, and in Ann's case, lifelong roots in Jacksonville. And they have used their friendships, their personal qualities to reinforce each other and to bring pleasure to other people as well. David was a wonderful tennis player, very competitive and very, very successful. It was his source of pleasure, of exercise, of energy, and interface with other people. He frequently played on our tennis court, and I enjoyed seeing him there and having him there. I can remember well one occasion when he and Governor Bob Graham played tennis on our court, and both of them had a very good time, but I think David beat the governor.
Well, we went to California, which is a long trip, and with Ann and David, Pammy and Bobby, and I don't remember, Pammy and Bobby Paul, I don't remember who else. But we had a great time, but we were so tired when we got there. So that night we all went to bed, slept wonderfully well, and the next morning everyone woke up and we all asked how the sleep was. Was fabulous. We want to know what mattresses we have so we can buy them. So we cut off, you know, where it says do not ever cut this off, we cut it off, and all of us got that same mattress and slept well at home. Wow.
Well, I think there will be several legacies. One, of course, is service to community. Another is the legacy of their family, their children and grandchildren. A third one is the numerous business enterprises which continue to thrive as a result of David's earlier leadership. And I think there will be an enormous legacy of friends and associates, people who love them and have worked with them and have enjoyed them individually and as a couple for many decades.
We went over to David and Ann's one Sunday afternoon, and I guess Deborah was around 5. She might have just been 3, but she was little. And she just was the most adorable child. Beautiful curls, blonde curls, and she went up and hugged her daddy, and her daddy leaned down and hugged her back, and it was just something that was very special that I've never forgotten all these years. And Deborah's how old? 50 plus now. So there. I mean, I would say that she's been a wonderful role model with her children, and they're very close. Young David lived in England for a long time, and they've just moved back here because I think more than anything else, he missed and she missed, because they both grew up in Jacksonville. But I also think that Ann and David are aging, and so are Margaret, his wife's mom and dad. And they just felt like they wanted to have their children know their grandchildren. And I think that comes from Ann and David feeling very strongly about family.
I first met David when we were working on the United Way campaign 50 years ago, 49 years ago. David was really involved in the United Way, and he set an example for everyone in the business community on how to give and how to make a difference in their giving in Jacksonville. He was just beginning CPI in those days. You know, if you mention the name Ann and David Hicks in Jacksonville, you're going to be well received. These people are well known in Jacksonville for all the good things that they've done. Things that they've done for the community and the opportunities they've provided for a lot of people. You know, Ann and David have been so big in the nonprofit area. They have, through Habit Jacks, they've built hundreds and hundreds of homes for the homeless. Through their scholarships at UNF, they've given education opportunities for people that come from the government housing, government subsidized housing, taking people who wouldn't have had a chance in this life if it wasn't for their scholarships to get an education at UNF and go on. There's a lot of satisfaction in that. And if there's something good going on in Jacksonville, whether it's at the Symphony or at the Cummer Museum of Art, wherever it is, you will find Ann and David right in the middle of the good things that are going on in Jacksonville. They really are respected and loved in Jacksonville. They've always been interested in other people and going beyond themselves. My office was next to David's for a long time after we both retired. And David particularly has such an interest in those people who don't seem to have much of a chance in this life. I've gone through the neighborhoods with him, and he just dreams about changing a neighborhood, making it better. When he was chairman of the Housing Authority in Jacksonville, The mayor appointed him chairman of the housing authority. It was the poorest housing authority in America. And when he left, it was the best. Think how many people's lives have been changed by his leadership and his interest in them. David has been fun to be with in business because he is so smart. He really is bright, and he's entrepreneurial, and he's totally honest. And those of us who've been with him during his business career in Jacksonville are really grateful for what he's done through his companies and the opportunities he's given some of us to invest with him. He's provided lots of great salaries, good income, business opportunities for other people at CPI, the bank, at Everbank. All of these things have turned out so well, and if you were a friend of David's, you were happy to be there with him. I was on the board of CPI and saw that grow from nothing to something very important that managed more than 48% of the home mortgages in the United States. And then I was with David when he acquired First Alliance Mortgage and created a company that eventually became Everbank. And those were really fun days in business. And being in the office next to him, we talked almost every day about what he could do for Jacksonville and how he was going to take this company and make it successful. He's a fun guy to be around, and he's one of my best friends, and I'm really proud to be a friend of David Hicks. Probably the happiest working people in Jacksonville over the years have been the people who came to work for Computer Power. And David had a wonderful philosophy for compensating people. He knew to get the best people, he would have to pay them well, and he did. And he incented them. And when Computer Power became really successful, all of these people in his organization benefited tremendously. And they're still around town today. And do they ever remember David Hicks well? That was the best thing that ever happened to them in their business careers, was joining David at CPI. Both Ann and David share this interest in other people and making Jacksonville a better place for all the people. That's something that they really share, is this common interest in making Jacksonville better. And they're both so philanthropic. They care about other people. They care about seeing good things get better. They feel together, they share that interest in making lives better. And I think it's the real tight common bond between them is their interest in making Jacksonville and a lot of these underprivileged people better. David has always been a competitive tennis player, and of course, he's at one level and I was always at another level. We talked a lot of tennis, but I wouldn't play David. He's in another league. For the last 15 or 20 years, my office was right next to David's office in this building that we shared. And David is big on using a whiteboard. And every day when I'd come to work, I could tell what David was thinking about because he put his notes up on the whiteboard. And some days he'd have the names of all the important people in town. And first thing I'd think about, he's on a money-raising campaign. You know, what's he up to today? Other days it would be something else. But David was always ahead of the crowd. He was always thinking ahead of everybody else. And you could find out what it was if you just came into his office and checked the board. David is very smart, and he liked to be surrounded by smart people. And he attracted a lot of smart people, not only in the bank, but at Computer Power. He really set a high standard. He was a business leader, and he always selected smart people who were good people. And you could see it in the work that they did and how they performed. And they were loyal. David's employees were the most loyal employees in Jacksonville. Somebody asked me what I'd learned from David. And the thing that I've learned from David is if he has an idea, I want to invest in it because David is smart and the things he's done turn out well. David's legacy and Ann's legacy will be that they've been outstanding citizens of Jacksonville. Over the last 50, 60 years, no one stands taller in the community than David and Ann Hicks. People who know them are proud to be their friends. I think they're in Jacksonville because Ann grew up here. And I think David moved here because Ann wanted to live here. And where Ann wants to be, that's where David's going to be. I know that David and Ann are so proud of their children. And I think they should be. They've all turned out so well. They've got great families, and they're doing great things. David follows them very, very closely. Ann follows them very, very closely, kids. And they're proud of them, and their grandkids too. Their philanthropy is just an amazing story. They are so generous. They give to so many things that are important in Jacksonville. But the most important things, I think, have been their scholarships to these kids that grow up in the federal, subsidized housing. They've taken those poor kids that are smart and given them college educations, and they have terrific lives. They have really touched a lot of lives. And that was his attitude when he was at the United Way. He was a leader because he cared so much about all the good things that were happening because of the things he was doing. And I saw that in Habijacks. He would drive the neighborhoods to find out where people were, where he was needed the most. And he had the #1 Habijacks group in the country. Just imagine, when they were building these houses for these poor people, they were #1 in the country. When he went to the Housing Authority, it ended up being the best in the country. That's real leadership and commitment, wouldn't you say?
Well, she's family now because of marriage with my niece and her son, which is wonderful. We're all happy about that. That was great. I was working on that a long time. I think I almost ruined it by telling them they should get together, but they did, and it's wonderful. So we are related through that. But no, I've just known Ann. It was through friendship, same group of friends. Despite the difference of age, we had a lot of mutual friends. How would I describe Ann? Terrific, all around wonderful, bright, beautiful, perfect woman, great sense of humor. A better sense of humor than most people. She's clever, and so she senses the humor in things that perhaps other people can't even find it. Her relationship was, I think, devoted to both of them, but especially her father. He was a charming, wonderful man, and everyone loved him, and he was very easy to get along with. And I think mothers and daughters sometimes have not as easy a time, but I think she had a good relationship with the family. And her mother adored Ann, was right on, sort of on top of her all the time, and she was right there with her. Ann was a star student, and so I think she stood out as one of their shining examples. She's intellectual and bright, and that's what you want. And Bartram really was a good school, and she was able to take advantage of that. And I think it was a good relationship. She's the kind of person that does give back to the community. She has in many ways, through contributions as well as being head of drives and supporting them. And she was president of the Junior League. That takes up an awful lot of time. And the sole purpose of the Junior League is to do for others and help the people in the community, those in need. And so I think Ann spent a good deal of time, as has David, in giving to the community in many, many ways. They're substantial citizens plus. I think it's been exemplary and wonderful. They've got great children, and my niece married one of them. I was thrilled about that, and I think, goodness gracious, they can't do better than that. They've all been success, I would say, worldly successes and character successes. They're wonderful, wonderful examples of the human race.
but she covers the waterfront. She's got brains and beauty and health and vigor, and kindness and goodness, and so I think she's just a perfect model. No, they've just done what you would like a noble and wonderful person to do. When they've been given the opportunity to lead an organization or a cause, they've done it and done a good job. So they've given back to the community, given back to their church. She's a wonderful family person, they are, and friend at the same time, and good community. So I can't say enough good things about either of them, both of them. Well, I can't really name all the ways that they'd be missing, but they'd be missing the example of a wonderful couple and a community-oriented person. And lots of organizations that are essential to Jacksonville would not be as comfortable as they are today, or not be as good as they are today. David's headed so many different things, as has Ann, and given to so many different things. It's definitely left a stamp on the community, a favorable stamp. Well, the Cummer, for instance, needs someone to be chairman of the board, and David did that, and he did a wonderful job. And Ann and her, I really can't think of the big things she's done, but she has done some big things just like that do make a difference to the community. And not just, they do little things too, but the big things they've also done. In many different organizations, they will have left a great deal, but the memory will just be of a perfectly wonderful person and come this way. We're glad she was in Jacksonville. I think they love the different aspects. I think they love the river and our beaches and our oak trees and our friendly people. I think they love lots of things about it, but I think more they've made it their home. It's really the people in Jacksonville that I think are so remarkable. I think they're just an outstanding group, friendly, nice, quite pleased with their surroundings too. So I think they like it here, and that we don't want to be anyplace else except to travel. And I think we're really blessed as a community. I think it's a caring community, and that makes me feel good. We did something. We wanted to get, we wanted to get the telephone poles down on Ortega Boulevard.
Tell me about that.
And she finally got it done. We gave up because we couldn't get it done, but she did it with another person and did get it done, which was wonderful of her. But we worked on that together, and she succeeded I did not in the part.
Can you tell me about that? I'm not too sure what you're talking about.
Telephone poles with the lights on them and the telephone wires. She got them put underground. The wires underground. They're not these tall, awful poles and wires, lots of wires. And we worked on that hard together and made progress, but did not get it down. And then she did it with someone else and did get it down. So Ann Ann did it, which is.
So was she beautifying a neighborhood?
Yeah, the whole thing, up and down Ortega Boulevard.
Was it also for like hurricanes or any of that type of
Well,
thing?
we used that as an argument that they blew down frequently, and that if they were underground, they wouldn't blow down.
Okay, so let's
talk to Heather about that.
Yeah, let's step back. So pretend I don't know anything about the project at all. So explain the project and why you did it and where it is and that sort of thing.
There are lights all up and down the streets in Jacksonville. But beside them, there was a horrible, ugly pole that went up with lots of wires. It was a telephone pole. And I guess there are two of them. It was ugly. It just, you didn't just stand there and say, my God, how ugly, but certainly it didn't add to anything. At every corner, every block, there were these poles and then the wires. And I worked on that and did not get it done, but we made some progress. And then Ann did continue later on and did get them put under. So now they're underground. It's just much prettier. I don't know whether they're here or not, but it's ugly. It's ugly. I think they were underground most places in Jacksonville, but in Ortega Boulevard, they were there. And we have the pretty azaleas and then these ugly poles and wires, but now they're underground. And so that's a definite plus.
Now, why would she work on a project like that? Why should she do that?
Because she cared. It was ugly. And we drive up and down Ortega Boulevard every day, so it was ugly every day. And now it's pretty every day. It had never got unugly when it was there. It kept on being ugly.
When we first moved back here after I graduated from law school in 1957, we met Ann and David. They were a very attractive young couple then. We got to know them and really enjoyed meeting them. Both bright, attractive, and young.
And mostly during that time, we enjoyed them. We'd go out to dinner with them, and of course, David was playing great tennis, and we had some boys who really became tennis players, and they just thought he was wonderful. He was their role model, kind of. Everybody would say, "There goes David Hicks."
Well, really, I remember distinctly having a nice dinner party at their house out near the Timuquana Club one time. And, you know, just really on social occasions. We weren't that close friends, and we didn't, because we were a little different age groups. But we got to know them, and primarily our children saw a lot of each other. Our son John and Deborah knew each other well. They went to Riverside Presbyterian together.
Right. And I guess Ann and I were in some civic things together. During that time, I was president of the Junior League, and she was, but later, but while we were going, you know. She was too young to be when I was as active as I was.
So were you really close before you moved to Atlanta, or more so when you came back? Tell me about your move away and then you came back.
We were good friends when we came back. Have we been back twice? We came back in '57, and then we went away. No, I don't guess we came until we came back. So I guess because of Margaret and David, that's pulled us a lot together, and the grandchildren that we share. I think we've probably gotten even closer, but we always loved them and thought they were wonderful and enjoyed the times when we were with them, and had some very close mutual friends. We both came down for a wedding. One of the Baker's children married, and we came down. Well, they were here, and David came down. He was working in at Vail, and our daughter was working in New York, and we came down for the wedding, and they met. And he claims he went home that night. He went back to Vail, or the next day, and told 3 people that he'd met the girl he was going to marry. So he said he picked up the phone and called Margaret, and he didn't know this, but later she said, "David, I was in the office of the senior partner at the law firm, and I couldn't chat with you," so she said, "Could you just call me back?" But he said, although I had found her, she had not found me, and so he never called her back. So it was, I guess, a year and a half or 2 years later, we again came back for the same family, another child to get married, and David didn't come, but Margaret went up to Ann and said, "You know, I was sorry," I think Margaret said, "that David never called me back. We had such a good time when we saw each other there." So Ann, I think, relayed the message, and David called her, and that was it. He asked her to come out and go to a music festival the next week, and she did. You know, it went from there.
I'd be willing to bet Ann did, because Ann and David talk a lot. They're really close and good friends, as well as mother and son. And so I suspect she knew of David's disappointment when the first meeting didn't come to any kind of affair.
No, I don't know about that. But anyway, she may have they gave a party, and she may have been reporting on that and saying, "Guess who was asking about you?" You know, she knew that they had, I think they went running together that first weekend, and they had enjoyed each other. And it was too bad that it, took 2 years like that. But anyway, it worked out. I think David said, which I thought was really funny, that he'd already asked the girl to go to that music festival. And he said, "I told her I'd get back to her." He hadn't really committed. But when he called Margaret after the conversation, he said, "I guess she thinks I'm crazy because I just never called her back." He asked Margaret to go, and she went, and as I say, that was it.
How is Ann and David parents are role models to their children? You said, obviously they're quite close. How do you see them interact with their family and their kids?
Well, I think Big David is a real entrepreneur, and I think he bred that into his children. But I think David told me one time, he told them, don't ever go to work for anybody unless you get a piece of the business. He said, working by the hour will not get you anywhere. And he showed them how to run businesses, buy businesses, and sell businesses. And aside from that, he was a leader in the community and a good role model.
And Ann was a wonderful mother. She just, I think, loved them and takes care of them, but I think takes them pretty calmly. I think that she backs them in whatever they want to do, and I think all of them grew up to do interesting things and go to good colleges and also have a good time. I think they've been great parents.
Well, I would say Dave is a very bright, energetic, attractive man, serious about what he does, whether it's play or business. He concentrates superbly, and when he sets out to do something, he usually gets it done.
And I think David is more of an introvert, Ann's an extrovert, and she loves people. But she's a very happy combination because she was also a good student, and she likes to read, she likes to learn, but she's not as concentrated. I think David is absolutely brilliant, but sort of like almost a genius. When he focuses on something, that's it. And I think Ann is more interested in a variety of things, but people love her, and she's also very, very funny. She's clever. When she says something, she gets everybody laughing. Well, I think because they balance each other. They certainly make a good whole. I think sometimes when introverts and extroverts marry, there can be a lot of friction. But I think in this particular case, they've both, sort of tried to understand and get from the other one. And I think they're very different. But I think they've loved each other, and I think they've made it work.
Well, I think they've certainly set the pace in Jacksonville for being very generous in civic activities, giving to numerous things which are good for the community. And I think their children have learned that lesson, that it's great to be able to give back. And Ann, of course, has been very active on her own in various civic endeavors and continues to be. So I think they've set a good example for their children. I think it's that when you set out to do something, that it's important that you do it well, and that it's important to give back to your community. It's important to be serious about your work, but also have a good time when you're not working.
There's just so many things. The University of North Florida, they've been a huge benefit to them. And then let's see, I think what the housing, what is it?
He was head of the public housing. David was head of the public housing here in Jacksonville and did a good job of turning it around. It was a real mess.
But Habitat
he
for
started
Humanity.
Habitat for Humanity. They call it Habajacks here. And he led that for many years and was very instrumental in obtaining money from the state, matching funds for corporate contributions. And under his guidance, they probably created more Habajacks houses than any other city in the country. Well, I think probably the most important thing they've done, and certainly what I'll remember them as, is creating a wonderful family and raising wonderful children. That's the most important thing that anybody can do. David, of course, will be remembered as a real entrepreneur, a creator of business, and a leader in the community.
I think Ann has been a tremendous leader in the community on her own, too. But of course, it's been wonderful to be able to help each other. I mean, in North Florida, for instance, he's given scholarships for the children that need it. I can't tell you how many. And they talk about that. They'll have a joint meeting, Ann said that David was supposed to, he said he'd take over a fund drive, but he was not going to make any of the talks. So Ann said she was happy to speak. She spoke all about what they were doing. And she said David just takes raising money like it's a team sport. He loves it. So he went out and got all the money. They work well together. That'll be their legacy too. Well, we talk about that sometimes, don't we? Where in the world did that come from? But I don't know.
I think our three joint grandchildren are real individuals. They're very different, each one, and they have their own strengths and weaknesses. But I can't tell you who they take after.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a little early. I think maybe it is. We'll have to see don't you think, how things develop, because they're really not firm. But I think they all are capable of doing what they want to do, which I will say. I think the Hicks's grandchildren, that would figure. They can do it. They have to just think about it and make up their minds. Just that everybody appreciates their friendship. I think they're very caring friends. I think if ever anybody needs them, they're there. And they're also just fun to be with. As I say, it's just a delight to be with them. And I think just most people that know that and feel that way about them and feel grateful for what they've done for the community and what they've done for their friends and what they just keep giving.
They're both competitive, and I think everybody knows that. David was certainly competitive in sports and competitive in business, and Ann too. Ann's a good golfer, learning to be a good bridge player. And I think everybody will remember them as a very remarkable couple.
Yeah.
How you feel about them?
Oh, how we feel about them? Well, I just think, tell them we love them. And we admire them.
Yeah.
But we also love them, and we appreciate what they've done for us, what they continue to do for the community, and what they do for the family. It's a remarkable family, but they give to all three, really. I think David is a man who has a remarkable focus, which he has used to benefit the community and to benefit his family, and he will be remembered for everything that he's given.
David is a man, I think, who has relatively few friends, but very close friends. He concentrates on his friendships as well as what he does in business. He doesn't communicate always his feelings toward people, but I think you can feel them and understand them. Ann is certainly a very attractive and outstanding woman. She's smart, but knows when to conceal it. She's got a wicked sense of humor. She knows how to put the knife in quickly before you even know it's there. She's very warm and a wonderful friend.
Well, I met Ann more than 60 years ago. And my family had moved from North Carolina. And I went to Bartram. I was a new student at Bartram. And I was 11 years old. And I was very lonely and very sad. And Ann was really nice to me. And she was a year older, so that was very special. And so my memory of Ann is when I was 11, and she was so kind to me when I was feeling very sad. She's very poised. She's very competent. She's very witty. She's very intelligent. And she likes to have a good time. Well, I think she's been a wonderful mother and wife. There's a lot of evidence there. She's a very good writer, and I think she's very efficient. She's very good with people. This is very objective. She's very quiet about her talents. Well, they've been tremendous benefactors, and they've not only been financially helpful to the community, but they've participated
and what they were interested in. Ann's always been very interested with UNF, and she's taken many classes there. She's gotten a double degrees, and David has just did a wonderful job with Habitats, and they were very active in where their interests lie. And those aren't the only ones. I remember when they moved back to Jacksonville, and David was very Yankee. Jacksonville is a little bit more sophisticated than it used to be. But I once said to Ann, I said, you know, I've often thought it must have been hard for David to move to Jacksonville. It's so southern and you're so much a part of the community. And Ann said, David didn't mind. What David really cared about was us. Well, I think there were opportunities here because it was a fairly unsophisticated city in a business way. And I think there were wonderful opportunities here for David, and he knew he had the intelligence and knew how to run with them. Another thing that I thought I've always remembered, we used to go to a Christmas party, the young parents, we'd all sort of been to school together. The Bents, Patricia, I think was here, used to have a Christmas party, and it was year after year after year, and we always tried to be clever. And one day, one evening we were there, and all of a sudden Ann turned to me and she said, now when is the baby coming? And I didn't even know I was pregnant. So I decided that Ann was amazingly insightful. Ann, for all of her lovingness and ladylikeness and sophistication, is really star crazy. She loves movie stars. And so we decided we'd go to LA, and it was about the time of the Academy Awards. And so we planned to, sort of be in the crowd, jumping up and down and hooping and hollering. But our plane was late. And so we arrived right there on the street leading up to the Dolby Theater, and there wasn't a person in sight. It was pitch black dark with the red carpet and trash everywhere. So we spent the next 2 or 3 days going to all the watering holes where we could see celebrities, and we saw no one until the last night. We were at the bar in our little hotel, and there was Tony Curtis with his chains and his black toupee and his pot belly. And we agreed that we wouldn't tell anybody. That was the only star we saw. But of course we did. I did know her mother, who was amazing. When she was 90, we were learning we knew how to play bridge, but we were catching up on our bridge. And Mrs. Curry would play bridge with us and help us. And she was in her 90s. And she was just a remarkably young 90-year-old and, living a very full life. So I remember her quite well.
Do you still play bridge?
I love it. And Ann has started playing. I'm not sure she likes it yet.
I just recently heard that. What do you think Ann has taught you? Has she taught you anything? Have you learned anything from her?
Ann is a woman who is very interested in a lot of things, and Ann is very much of a people person, I think. She loves going to parties and being with people and having fun with them.
His mission has been to take one individual neighborhood and try and build it up. And he chose a neighborhood that I'm involved in. It's called Newtown. It's in back of Edward Waters College. And the transformation has been extraordinary. I think most of these neighborhoods in Jacksonville that need rehabbing terrifically, housing is a big issue, and it's a health issue for lots of the children, and it also is a hope issue. If you live in a terrible environment, you really have lost hope. So what they've been able to do, Ann and David, has been extraordinary and transformational. And I just always want to thank them more than they'll ever know for this concentration. Ann and David have made significant progress in pushing UNF into the forefront. As you probably know, or most everybody knows, there are a lot of universities in Florida, and there's a big competition for who gets the big bucks in the state budget. And Ann and David's gifts have been rather extraordinary, and the thing that has revolutionized UNF is that now there will be an honors college in their name. It's a big sense of pride for all of us that know Ann and David, and joy and thanks that they've made these gifts. Well, Jacksonville is an interesting place, and there are a lot of very passionate people here. And once you develop that passion, you really go for it and kind of make a statement about it. And if you are able, obviously, you give big gifts. Many of us have passions, but Ann and David seem to be in the forefront. And again, we love that they do all of this, and we thank them enormously. We all have now generations behind us. It's just great. The Hicks children and the Paul children grew up together, and now there are grandchildren that are growing up together, and it's a nice feeling to know that we have this safety net. Well, Ann and my sister-in-law, Patricia Bent, grew up together, and my husband was Patricia's older brother. So they all rattled around together growing up, and the minute I got here, I was sort of factored in. So Ann and I have been very close friends. I saw David on tennis courts in the Northeast because he was a very accomplished tennis player. And I didn't know at the time that he and Ann would marry and come down here. We didn't actually know each other, but as couples, we have always had a great time together, done a lot of things, traveled, been very, very close.
Tell me about
We had so much fun. My parents had a house in Nassau, and we were able to go down there a couple of times, and we did go to Wimbledon, and Ann and I did go to the ambassador's house, the American ambassador's house, for a party, and we thought it was so swell. We didn't exactly have the right clothes, but we had a wonderful time, and it's a nice memory to have. So yes, we've been a lot of places together. Well, we lived on Ortega Boulevard for quite a long time, and before we moved to the beach, and we, I think, maybe had the only pool. I'm not quite sure, but we sort of had an open house policy, and it was really fun. We had a trampoline, which seemed to be a big draw. Now I understand how dangerous they can be, but at the time, everybody was jumping on the trampoline. So had a lot of fun times in that house, and then we moved to the beach and moved the headquarters to the beach. Oh, we've backed each other up in a million different situations. That's what I find so extraordinary about this place, Jacksonville. We're all there for each other. And I don't find, as I travel around and visit other friends in other parts of the country, it's not quite as supportive as it is here. Oh, I think they've been full-time participants in the growth of Jacksonville. I think that really is a gift. And if you had to name on one hand the people that have been involved, they certainly would be on that one hand. I think the fact that they have been involved in Jacksonville and participated and made Jacksonville the city it is, among others, But I think if you could count on the fingers of one hand, they would be participants. I've been to their place in Vail recently, and it's a very peaceful place by a rushing stream and beautiful flowers. Anne is very good with flowers, by the way, and it just is charming. And it's a real hideaway, although they love to entertain. And we've been fortunate enough to go to Vail over many, many summers ourselves. So we've had a wonderful friendship with them over the years in Vail, Colorado. And she is so loyal and true. And I think that's hard to come by in today's world. But I think it comes from years of understanding each other. And she's been a great friend for a long time, and I know I can count on her. Oh, I think she is just a hugely attractive personality. She's very funny. She writes beautifully. She has a lot of pizzazz, if you want to call it that. And she's always on top of everything. She reads a lot. She stays sort of involved in a lot of areas, so she kind of knows what's going on. Fun to be with her. Well, I think David is very introspective, and as with many marriages, opposites attract. And I think he's in particular somewhat quieter and thoughtful, and maybe you could say introverted. And Anne is outgoing and present and involved and funny and fun. I think people will always remember Anne and David Hicks. There are buildings named for them. There's a gallery at the Cummer Museum. Their names are prominently displayed in many different places in the city. And I think they will be remembered as among our most important citizens. You know, when there are dedications, they don't make much of it. They really do this out of interest and kindness and the importance of giving back. They have the right attitude about all of this philanthropy. I mean, we all know people that give big gifts, and some do it more gracefully than others, and I would say that they did their philanthropy very gracefully.
In 1994, the city of Jacksonville operated the public housing here, the housing projects as they called them, and the mayor, Ed Austin, appointed David as chair of a newly formed housing authority and appointed me and several others to be on that authority for a 4-year term and take over the operation from the city of all the public housing in Jacksonville. And it had been in real trouble and made national headlines for all the problems they'd had. And David had a game plan. Ann had already been involved with Habitat for Humanity in Jacksonville, Habijax as it's known. And Ronnie Ferguson, who was the vice mayor, was appointed as the chief executive officer of the housing authority when it was formed. And the troubles that were created in the projects, as we called them then, and now they're called communities, was notorious. And so David came up with a game plan, and he invited a lot of businessmen who had input, and women who had input into housing, to be on the board as well, but non-voting members, because the board was limited to 7 voting members. And those people were treated just as if they were members. I think this is the only time this has ever occurred in Jacksonville prior to that date and since. Those people added a lot, and the meetings were open. And after about a year or two, David brought in business
structure, and some of the staff were a little bit skeptical that what was going on, but since the government has its own accounting policies. And Ronnie Ferguson bought into the program, and he and his staff realized what benefit that was going to bring to the Housing Authority. And instead of being on the troubled list, within several years, Jacksonville was in the top 10 performing housing authorities in the country. And from there, Ann and David created a scholarship at University of North Florida for Housing Authority community residents, or Section 8 that was administered by the Housing Authority, to go to the University of North Florida. And that was, I believe, their first real connection with the University of North Florida, which, as I'm sure you've heard from others, has become a real dedication. And then about right after that, in 2000, David came up with an idea he found in the statutes that contributions to housing, public low-income housing, for which Habajaks qualified, were a candidate for tax credits for the state of Florida corporate income tax. And our tax lawyers verified that that was in fact the case, and it was a pool of state money, and it was on a first-come, first-use basis. So David, with that information, went around to the businessmen in Jacksonville and women, and got his entire campaign was to build 200 houses in Habajaks in 2000, 200 in 2000. And he talked all these businessmen and women into putting up money, getting these tax credits, and they built 200 houses. I don't think that's ever been done in another housing authority anywhere in the country before or since. So, and then from there, with the University of North Florida, it really showed Ann and David became the real partners in running Habajaks for those years, and it was a great success story, and still is. The city of Jacksonville is a much better place to live, particularly for inner city people, than it would be if they were not here. For a long time, either Ann or David were chairs of the Habajaks, and I think they're still major donors, and I don't know whether either one of them are still on the board, but their legacy, not only that, some of the people who worked for David at Computer Power got involved, and I know some of them are still on the board. So, and then in the Housing Authority at one point, when Computer Power was still, had been sold by the Hicks and other shareholders, they got Computer Power to donate their old computers to the Housing Authority for their communities to teach young people how to use computers. And that was a major program for the housing communities.
Oh, wonderful, loving, interested in everything they were interested in, even if it wasn't an interest of theirs. Like David was a great water sports sailor, hunter. Big David was not, fisherman, but was so interested in learning what he loved. So Charlie had a boat, which was wonderful. So they went on the boat down to, I guess it was the Keys, or where did we go? And David got out there and endured the Gulf Stream as best he could, and watching all these fish being caught. But I'm going to use this funny story. This is coming from Ann, but she told it on herself anyway. She was saying when they're home, this is pointing out the difference in their personalities, that David would be on the riverside looking at the beautiful river and enjoying its peace, and Ann would be in the kitchen, which is on the street side, see who was coming by and where they were going. But they both appreciated each other's views, which I thought was a great way of summing the two of them up.
David is very focused, and that's why he's been such a successful businessman, or successful in running the Housing Authority or Habajaks or whatever, because when he comes up with a plan, he creates a business plan and he sticks to it until he gets it done.
I know that Ann is certainly more the people person. David's picky about his people, but loves you when he does. But everybody's wowed by his business prowess as much as her people skills. So it works together as a team.
We think alike, and I'm a little softer sell than David. David can be very intense, and so I think we made a good team. They even used to take me on sales trips because a lot of times the big banks that were their customers had concerns over the legality of a small company in Jacksonville, Florida, doing all the data processing for the biggest banks in the world, and their auditors were concerned, and so there were some legal issues, and I could always sort of smooth over their questions, and I think we only lost one account during all that time to those big banks, and they took the processing in-house, but they used a lot of computer powers systems that David and his partners had created.
Oh, that's interesting.
When people in the community hear the Hicks name, they are overwhelmed, I think, with the generosity that they have given to the community in so many different ways.
And involvement.
And involvement, yes, yes. So they're very important people to the community of Jacksonville, and everybody recognizes that for sure.
And it's not just the philanthropy, it's also the commitment and involvement.
Right. And they were at Amelia Island, and we were all into tennis, and it was the women's tennis?
Yeah, I ran the Amelia Island for a while when it was in bankruptcy because there wasn't anybody else around, and they had a women's tennis tournament that was national for about 20 years, and
right,
we had some good friends come in and stay with us. We stayed with the Hicks at their condominium, and our friend, he was also a very good tennis player.
Our friend Charlie Shaver from North Carolina was an excellent tennis player as well. So the two of them were trying to play together, and some of the women players were practicing on the court that they wanted. So they said, I'm sorry, but we were practicing here. And they said, well, we would like to play if we can. And they said, why don't we flip? I think David said, why don't we flip?
He likes to flip.
Well, and so they won and they played each other. That's how they stayed on the court.
The two men played the two women tennis players, Pam Shriver.
The professionals. I can't remember the names.
It wasn't, I think one was Pam Shriver.
Well, I think
it was when Martina Navratilova was, she could hardly speak English.
But anyway, and they...
Back in the 70s.
They beat them really badly.
The guys.
Yes, they did. So they love to tell that story to this day. It's a wonderful one. Well, I just think that we've all been really lucky, blessed, whatever you want to call it, to know Ann and David and to follow their path as best we can. They are infectious about their passion, and you feel that, and you want to do it as well, and you want to support their passions. I think that's what we get from them, which is wonderful.
Yep.
What was she like back in high school?
She was a lot nicer. She's a very clever person, and she's always coming out with some nonsense. Like we used to always have a party after Christmas morning when everybody had opened their presents. They'd come over the house to have a Christmas drink, and it was about 9 degrees that Christmas. And my other friend that was a bachelor, he brought this good-looking gal over there. I mean, she was something, what we call eye candy now. But he was hesitant to bring her into the house in spite of it being cold like that, because he knew these social girls would tear her up, you know. So he kept her outside by the pool, and next thing I knew, there were about 70 men out there with her. And Ann Hicks was standing there next to me, and we were watching all that. And I said, Ann, what do you think about that? And she said, I think that girl's got the wrong zip code. Well, that stuck. Anytime we had a girl that we wouldn't like, we'd say she's from the wrong zip code. We made a trip with, many trips with David and Ann all over the world. And we were in Africa one time. And David and I had to go in and help the white hunter get his single-engine airplane out and start it up. And I thought, oh my Lord, this thing can't go but 160 miles an hour, and we had a 40-mile-an-hour headwind. And I told the girls, don't worry. I said, as soon as we get up there, you'll see it's nothing but beautiful plains out there. And something happens, we can just glide right on down. Well, we never saw anything but mountains the whole way. And David and Jimmy Stockton, who was kind of taking us around, they wanted to land on a volcano because they never had seen the inside of a volcano. And both aunts were sitting there just terrified, you know. That plane was bouncing around and everything. And I kept hearing Ann Hicks say, I'll tithe, I promise I'll tithe. And so we got to where we were going. I said, Annie, that was great about you committing yourself to tithe to the church. And she said, oh, I had my fingers crossed. And I said, well, you shouldn't have told that till we got back home. But, so anyhow, we always had a lot of fun traveling with them.
She's a lot of fun. She's a good leader. They've both done, of course, so much for the community, but she's one of my dear friends. I think the city's probably a better place because I know the city's a better place because of that. I think they're a good team. I think they both have passion for the same things. Certainly education, I would put at the top of the list. The arts, they've done a lot for the arts and certainly for housing. They're a good fit, I think, because of their shared passion and they're both smart as they can be and they're both got leadership qualities and they've both done a tremendous amount in this community and I admire everything they've done.
Well, because she wants to get involved in all these things and he's a pretty good support system. And he gets involved into his own self. Mm-hmm. So together they make a good team. Yeah. The most notable thing to me is what they've done for the University of North Florida out there. Right. They've just given a ton of money. But it's all worked out good, and Lord knows they support everything there is in Jacksonville. So they're terrific citizens to have. He's been tremendously successful in many, many arenas, but the one that I really thought was the best was this Haberjack thing. And I don't know, he'd have to tell you how he did it. But somehow he got interested in building these houses for the poor people, I guess I'd call them. And that wasn't taking off too good, but he went over to Tallahassee and he found a slush fund over there that the state had, where they would match for charitable things what we as a company might put up. And of course you're getting a 2-for-1 deal, so that appealed to everybody. And he started that doggone thing. And I would guess in the early days, we were probably building 20 of those things where somebody like Tampa or Orlando was building one. And he's kept after that thing to this day. He's still involved in it, and it is just, I can't tell you how many homes have been built, well over 200 or 300.
The first time I saw him was at a rehearsal dinner, and he was dressed in a Mount Holyoke gym suit, wielding a tennis racket, dancing around the floor of the yacht club to a song that, of course, Ann had written, because she could do that in 2 seconds, as a toast to somebody. And I thought, well, either he's ruled by his wife and has to do what she tells him, or he's cute and has a great sense of humor and was happy to do this. And, of course, it was the latter, and that was my first introduction to him.
When you hit that 80 button, you're on borrowed time anyhow, so you might as well enjoy it. And I wish him a very healthy time from now on.
Well, the first time I met Ann, I'm not quite sure when that was, but our beginning of our friendship, when we giggled a lot together and had the most fun, was when we were at Bartram School together. She's younger than I and in another class, but we just immediately knew that we like to have a lot of fun. Ann is wonderful at everything she does, and I was going to start by saying I can't get dressed in the morning or today without something Ann has given me This is a bracelet that she gave me for my birthday once. It's always something that Anne's generosity has befitted me. And she was terrific in all of them. It was just amazing, her composure, but she's very good on her feet anyway. But I was in awe because I wanted to be an actress, but I wasn't nearly as good as Anne was. She just did it beautifully. She played some kind of a nurse one time in Gaslight and had a little nurse's uniform, a little nurse's cap. She just became the person like that. She's just got an incredible talent for whatever she aspires to do or is told to do. She does it, and she does it well. The horseback riding, magnificent. The posture, you know, the sit. It was just great. Great watching her. Always fun watching her. Anne was always the most fun of all. So, of course, I was attracted to her for a friend because I'm the one who likes to giggle in the back row, and so did she. So we had a good time. We did a lot of silly, girly things that were just, we thought we were very funny, and it's always been a great pleasure of mine to laugh. And Anne's too. We still do. She does, we can program, she can just say 2 words and I know exactly what she's going for and where we are, and we agree on every level. Well, she was always very bright and had her eye on the prize. In other words, she knew how to pull herself together, and she could be giggling in the back seat, but she could still get up and make her speech. She was always goal-oriented in the sense that she was president of the class and she was president of the whatever we were joining, and when she went to Mount Holyoke, it was the same thing. And she even has always been such a great provider, and she was always able to participate and make things nice for her friends or whoever she was with. That's a great, great quality, you know, to make somebody comfortable and to be aware of anticipate what tensions they might be undergoing. It's a great quality. Well, her greatest gifts are keeping her eye on what's happening. She has a great ability to me to concentrate and catch everything that's happening and assess it properly. She's very mature. She's very grown up in spite of my emphasis on giggling a lot. She just grew up into a complete and total effective, affectionate, loving friend. Well, she has taught me many things, and one is that I would say it's important to keep up with the people you care about. It's important to let them know you do. And she's always been that way since I can remember, since we were young. Always at your back. She can do many, many things. She's multifaceted. She's always looked beautiful. She's always been wonderfully dressed and taking care of herself, walking, and she's just a complete person. Oh, the audition was terrific for him because he was so single-minded with his business acumen and his wanting to be successful, as most young men are. You hope they are. That's a goal most people have. And she was so much softer and so much more able to swim in the shark-infested waters with humor. And so that let him time to concentrate on what was important to him, and they've just worked as a team from the time I saw them together first on the campus and was introduced to him. They've always been a team is how I've been able to see it, and what a lucky, wonderful thing for people to have in their lives. Because each supplies the other thing. You know, Anne was the one who could swim in with the social life or the introductions or the Christmas presents and David was able to concentrate on his business, which was important to her, and she was happy to be helpful. And he's not a Southerner, you know, he's a Yankee. We differentiate here, and from Massachusetts, so his whole personality is a little bit more clipped than Anne's. Anne's is flowing and fluid, and so the combination was just terrific. Oh, their wedding was a happy, wonderful, convivial time. And Anne was happy, David was happy, the bridesmaids were happy, Ruth and Ben were happy. And I just remember it was very glorious and very beautiful. Anne knows how to make things beautiful, and so did Ruth. They were very good at that, detail-oriented, and make things visually very beautiful. Oh, she'll have so many legacies because they have given so much to the city. They've given time, energy, expertise, money, everything that you could possibly think in the field of education, in the field of the Kummer Gallery of Art, in the field of Bartram, all through education schools, UNF of course, and I think it's just going to be a huge legacy of a wonderful couple that did so much for our city. What I thought was one of the greatest signs of her thoroughness and her genuine interest was she became a student first. And she got, I believe, another second degree there before she decided to go on and pursue this in such a deep and positive way. And I thought, that is really a good thing to do. You know, I have lived this life. I have been a student. I have been in a classroom. And this is what this is what I believe in, and I believe in it for reasons that are legitimate and hands-on. By making other people comfortable, you can expand your knowledge of what the world is like and go forward with that because you've been able to be around people and share information, share love, share friendship. I just think most bright minds are curious about what's going on and how it works. And she's just extremely bright and comfortable within herself to say, how does that work? You know, that's the key. If you don't ask, you'll never know. I hope we both live a lot longer and share some more memories and have a few more giggles. Ann and David mean so much to so many people, it would be hard to even start with a list. And I'm one of them. I cherish their friendship, I cherish their time with me, and I admire them both enormously.
Well, when I moved to Jacksonville 50-some years ago, my husband and David were working for the same company, Stockton Whiteley Davin. So we knew each other through that business connection, but then we became friends and have stayed friends, even though I had another husband after that, for all these years. And I have the greatest admiration for Ann. I watched her give back to Jacksonville what she took growing up, as all of the culture, all the glamour. She's given so much, and she's shown a lot of people how to live better. Ann has always had a plan, and of that I am so envious. I have never had a plan or a goal. She is loaded with them. And that's why I think most people admire her, perhaps sometimes even fear her for her organization and what she can point up in what others lack. She doesn't talk about what she's going to do. She just gets an idea, and then it works into a form, and then it works into 3D. She's just put an image out there that people, I think, admire, really admire. She keeps her cards close to her chest. She's done a nice job, lovely job with her children. They're just fine. Her marriage is fine. Her yard looks beautiful. It's just a showstopper. There's nothing that Ann touches that she doesn't make a success of. Well, I think she understands that if she has something, she needs to share it. A lot of people don't feel that way. She and David are very philanthropic. And I think she just does it out of gratitude for what she has. David is very directed, very intelligent, an excellent tennis player. I think you can tell so much about a person by the way they play a game, how they call the ball in or out. And David has just been one of those competitive tennis players, and he was really good at it. And he's been good at everything he put his hands on. He's just delightfully smart. I mean, you just have to admire him. I wish I had been in his vapor trail and followed along and done exactly the steps he's done because he's done so well with his life. Well, to tell you the truth, you don't need to put this in the movie, but they made a lot of money and they gave it away. The first time I realized how public their philanthropy was when he began working with Habajacks. And then the University of North Florida was developed here, and Ann became a board member, and she took classes, and she's been really active in the development of the school, in the higher levels of the development of this particular university, and they have seen the need and given donations to the school that have really been marvelous. From all of the things I've said prior to this, though, I mean, they are, they plan, they organize, they talk to each other about I feel like that. I don't know that, I wasn't there, but I just feel like they are an organizing team. And I think for some people, maybe they are so strong that maybe they're frightening in a way, but I just think they're just remarkable. So few people really communicate the way they have. Well, personally, I think Ann's greatest gift's her little waist. I'm so envious. I love her little tiny waist. It's just like an ant. And the other gift she has is I have never seen Ann look a mess. I have never, when she is participating in an athletic event, Ann is so tidy. And David, I think David's business prowess is his greatest asset. But that waist, I don't think funny when I think of Ann and David. There isn't much humor there, although it's appreciated. You know, they're just a real good audience. Ann is a sponge. She sees everything and hears everything and then computes it. You can just see it now. It's like the Enigma machine. There's nothing that gets by her. And she knows how to put the hook in the water and then slowly turn the reel to pull it in. She could
drove
see
by and saw some
cars, of course. Well, you know, it was funny because none of us have seen each other much for the summertime except the bridge players. They just taken up bridge. And I can't play bridge, and I'm never going to do it. So I've missed seeing all my friends all summer long because everybody's going so many different directions. Plus the fact you just can't pull yourself together in the summertime to do anything that you should for the winter. So yesterday we all were together, and I saw Ann across the room in this lovely royal blue blouse, and I was way far away, and I had it was all the friends I've had since I've lived here, I swear. So many of them were there. And I had a little pity-pat because I was so glad to see her. It was so funny because I didn't feel that way about anybody in that room. Though Ann and I are not best friends, I still feel such an affinity to her. You know, we just go back for such a long time. She was the first person that I could call on the telephone when I moved here and have a chat. Oh, I think they're excellent. They put their children, I think, even before themselves. They're just grandparents. No, only because there aren't any funny stories about Ann. She is so together that if there were a foible, you would never know it. I think they're going to leave a big shadow. I think they've been really good to Jacksonville. Ann has cultivated a lot of age groups for friends and if there was something to learn, Ann wanted to know it. Ann can sit back now and not do another thing and still be famous. She's done so much, you know. She really doesn't have to do anything else. Just watch her children carry on in her stead.
Will she?
Sure. No, she'll be right smack in the middle of every circle. If she has to learn how to play bocce ball, she's going to learn how to do it well.
But I always so admired both Ann and David, whatever they were involved in, I wanted part of it. It seemed the right direction. Even though I was older than they were, I just thought they had taken the right path. I really think it just was in their genes. I think they both cared so deeply. The symphony, whatever they were part, I don't think Ann was as involved in the symphony as David was. But I think they both had such a deep feeling for our community. They wanted to make it a better place to be. Together, David and Ann both have made a tremendous impact on this community, and I think people think of them, although they've done things individually, like when Ann was head of the Junior League, or David was involved in the head of the symphony, but I think it was always a joint effort. I think they both backed each other up, even in business. I think Ann was such a great support of David's. Well, David was head of the symphony and very involved and cared so deeply about music, always loved classical music. In fact, he was so kind to give me
a collection of some of his recordings that he cared most deeply about. Very special people. They are two really wonderful people. I've always had a heart for David. He is so bright, and I just so admire him. And I love Ann. I mean, she is just wonderful. She brings life to anything she's part of. I think her greatest gifts are to discern what's really important in our community or in life and set a goal, and those are her goals. Whether they were the community's goals or anybody else's, that's where she went. I think the name Hicks stands for anything that's really fine in our community, and they've made a great contribution to it. It's something I would want to be part of. I think life lessons, I would say, to determine what's really important and not care what the community thinks or what your friends think, but to make a step in that direction. I think they've shown that over and over again. They're loyal to the end, and they will support anything you're part of. They're very, very supportive people, both of them. And you could be in the gutter, they'd still be there for you. I think their legacy will be they left not only Jacksonville, but the world a better place because they were here. A beautiful couple that did that. Just noticing how close their children are. All three of their children are wonderful and have married wonderful people. And well, the reason my better half isn't here right now is because he's having lunch with Rob Clements, and nothing can interfere with an appointment with one of the Hicks. They're such a special individually and special couple. I love David. Bless his heart, he's had so many difficult things right now, but I just love that man. And Ann has been such a supportive and beautiful wife all through this. I think everyone can learn a lesson from Ann, how she lives her life. Ann is so good at everything she does. I think it was very difficult for her to realize that bridge took a lot of work. We knew that golf did. We were always taking lessons when we played golf, but to realize that bridge is such a challenge mentally and to be good. I think Ann and David always make you feel very comfortable. You know that you're accepted. You know you're part of their friendship. And you feel very blessed.
I would describe David at that time as a relatively young man who was on his way in business. He was doing well, he was smart, he was able, and it was clear that that was the case. Well, he married Ann, and that probably was responsible for making him. Well, both Ann and David are very smart, very able, and very personable. And I've enjoyed my relationship with them all of these years. There were occasions when David and Ann and I and my wife traveled together. Ann and David and I and my wife went to Munich to the Oktoberfest, and we just had a terrific time trying to keep up with the beer consumption that was going on at Oktoberfest. My business partnerships or associations with David have been extremely pleasant for many, many years, ever since the very beginning. And fortunately, all of those connections through the various things that we've done together have turned out to be very happy results. So at this stage of my life, I can say that my association with David have been, from a personal standpoint, extremely friendly and a lot of fun, but have also been extremely profitable. Oh, I think David and Ann have been amongst the great philanthropists of Jacksonville. They've given a lot of themselves first and a lot of their money to various causes here in Jacksonville, which have been very helpful to the city and to the recipients on the other end of their philanthropic efforts. Well, I think the Hicks family have been terrific assets for this city and remain terrific assets for this city. Everybody that I know who is familiar with the lives of Ann and David Hicks have tremendous admiration for their efforts and for their participation in the various parts of the city which not only need help, but which can benefit so greatly from the help that they've given them. They give money, they give a part of what they have earned through their lifelong work as just a part of their personality. That's what they feel like they're here for. The first 30 years is for learning, the second 30 years is for earning, and the third 30 years is for returning. And they really live that kind of motto. Well, from an outsider view, looking into their family activities, my feeling is that their first motivation was always love of their children, love of each other. Another motivation was education. They spent a great deal of time and effort making sure that the educational opportunities given to their children were of the best, and as a result, all three of their children are beautifully educated. All three of their children have done extremely well in life, and they are approaching the age where they are returning. Therefore, when we went to Europe together, he was still a fast driver, and I was not such a fast driver. And we rented a Mercedes automobile to drive from the city where we landed in Germany to Munich, and David wanted to drive that Mercedes. And he got out on the Autobahn and drove at about 130 miles an hour, and it made me very nervous. And I finally had to say, David, if you don't slow down, I want to get out and get another car. Well, I don't know how he drives now because I haven't ridden with him in a long, long time. But as he grew a little older, he seemed to me to like to own automobiles that would move very rapidly. So I don't know exactly how he drives. Now, probably doesn't drive very much anymore. Well, I'm now 92 years old, and having friends that I've known for more than 50 years is a very important thing to me. I hope they live a long time, and I hope I continue to live a long time so that we can continue to know each other. A long, long-term friendship is very, very important, I think, in life. The philanthropic activities will be important for the city and for them. Their personal lives and the way they have lived their lives will be an important legacy. They are honorable, fine, leading people amongst the human race, and in Jacksonville in particular, that is so. They will have a great legacy in the educational field of Jacksonville. There are several universities in Jacksonville, all of them of great interest to David and Ann, and the University of North Florida has been especially benefited by its association with David and Ann. I think those legacies, their religious life has been a great example. Their participation in church activities have been particularly praiseworthy. So I think their legacy will cover many different fields of interest in the human being. I wish for them continued happiness and long, healthy life.
We have pictures, family pictures, of Ann when she was a little girl, and usually around horses. My dad had show horses, and Ann had a horse, at least one that I know of. And we have pictures of her sitting astride or standing beside her horses, English saddle horses. And we also have pictures of Ruth and Ben when I was a child. I was probably, one picture in particular, I was probably 2 or 3 years old. It was my brother and I in a horse buggy, and Ruth is standing on one side of us and Ben on the other. And I think Ben was probably holding the reins of the horse so it wouldn't trot away. And these were taken in the early 1950s. But our parents were close friends. I remember when David and Ann got married. David probably doesn't remember this, but I remember his brother came and stayed with us. Dad was a physician here, but he had a farm in the country. And we lived there, and his brother came, David's brother came and stayed with us during the wedding, time frame. I remember when Deborah was born, Mother brought my brother and I, have an older brother, into town to the hospital to see Ann. She wanted to visit Ann, of course, and to see baby Deborah. And she left us on the steps inside the hospital, at the base of the steps. And while sitting there, I'll never forget it, David probably does not remember this, but he came barreling down these flights of stairs, probably covering 2 or 3 steps, 4 steps at a time, as young people could do. And he had to make a last turn to come down the last section of steps where we were sitting, and he literally jumped over our heads, but managed to say, "Hello, Peter, hello, Rob," while he was just about in midair, landed on both feet, had this huge, satisfied-looking smile on his face, and took off down the hallway. I've just never forgotten that. Well, we lived in the country, and of all of Mother and Father's friends, the Currys would come out. They would be the ones to come visit. And we would also come into town and visit them at the house that Ann and David currently live in on Ortega Boulevard. And I was quite young. My brother was a little older, but I could have cared less about the grown-up conversations in the living room, so to speak. And so Ben, bless his heart, he would take my hand and lead me into, they have a room close to the main entrance of the house, which I always thought of simply as a library. And he knew how much I enjoyed books, and so he would just take me in there, and I believe they would have something like the old World Book Encyclopedia. And I would just sit there for several hours while they were talking in the other room, and I'd be reading. But it was just one of those long-term relationships with the Currys. Let's go see the Currys, And it could be they wouldn't even have to call. They would just, be at the doorstep, so to speak. Well, there were great, parents. I mean, David was a great role model, and of course, Ann has been so involved in things all of her life. I just never even questioned their ability to be great parents. I mean, look at their children. I remember I had lived in Georgia after I graduated from college for about 6 or 7 years. And I wanted to come back to Jacksonville, and I was young. I really didn't have anything to do from a work perspective. And I ran into Ann. I was living at Mother's house, and I ran into Ann. I was about 28 years old, 27, 28 years old. And Ann came over one day, and she did not know I was back in town, and she saw me, and we chatted. And she said, "You need to go talk to David." So I did. And I remember to this day going over to Computer Power's office and sitting down with David, chatting with him, and we were catching up about not only what I was doing, what Rob, my brother, had been doing, and so forth. But he took me around the company and showed me various business sections, took me into the computer room, showed me around, was explaining a lot of stuff to me. And I had been involved with some computers before in a prior job. And so I got hired. And I ended up, like I said, down there a long time, 30 years. But I was fortunate in that I worked in a lot of the varied business areas, because it was a data processing company, but you had a business side to it, which David always stressed. He thought that the technology was just a tool. The end result of the business was the point of being in the business. And I got to learn both sides, more of the data processing side, and also worked on the business side, and then ended up in sales and managing accounts and so forth and so on. So it was a great opportunity, and I am forever grateful to both of those people, David and Ann, for having the faith in me, this little lost soul in his late 20s, wondering what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, for giving me a chance. And he was great, because you were always respectful of David. He commanded your respect, and he had his way of how he wanted things done, but you always understood the logic behind it. This simple logic, common sense stuff, The customer was always first. Get the customers on the application, treat them correctly, and they'll always stay. That was his mantra. And to illustrate that point, I still keep in touch with my old Computer Power friends, and some of the things people would repeatedly say after David had long left the company and we were owned by different organizations was, you heard the remark, "David would have done it this way." Which of course meant these people don't know what they're doing. David would have done it this way. Which is kind of the point is, that's how much people respected David. Well, David was always early on a big fan of the United Way. And he encouraged all of us employees to give, which we did every year. And that tradition continued on for most of the time over the course of my career down there. A lot of us traveled. I spent years on airplanes going all over the country, which was great. Very much of a learning experience. And David never wanted us to stay in lousy facilities. They were so generous to the employees. We could stay in nice hotels, be able to feed ourselves with decent food, and it was just one of those things. I mean, you felt like you were of value. And David he would come down in the cafeteria and eat lunch with the employees. He valued his people, because he knew if the people were happy, the customers would be happy, they would be loyal. Our turnover rate in that company was just nil. You came and you stayed. We all knew each other. The environment was one you could be anywhere in the country with a problem, and you could pick up the phone, and it didn't matter who you talked to. It could be in a totally different business area. You could be talking to a business guy, but you needed a technology person. Whoever picked up the phone at 8 o'clock at night, they would get you an answer. They would help you because they knew who you were. So it was just a great environment to work in. And you've got to, give it to David to create that environment. It starts from the top. He was a great person to work for. David taught me, if I could say a couple of things from what I've learned from David, was discipline and hard work and the satisfaction of improving yourself. He was always driven, to succeed and do other things, and surrounded himself with smart people. I think she was an only child. I think her parents were great. I can't really tell you beyond the fact that she always excelled. She was riding horses, showing horses at a young age. She went to a great university, and she too has always been kind and helped people. I've never felt that Ann or David were people who would not stop and spend time with anybody. Ann has been nothing but kind to me. She was always kind to Mother, and David was the same. David would sit down with anybody and talk. And I think he always had, people didn't recognize it all the time, I think, because he was driven to succeed, and he was a good, smart, pragmatic business person. But you could tell from his management of how he included his employees in the business with the profit sharing and so forth, and how loyal he was. He was loyal to his employees. He just wasn't one of these to just let them go because of some rumor or something. He was loyal to them. His legacy will be a very proactive and, what's the word? Can't find the word. Far-reaching, far-looking business person, because what he started in Computer Power was really, that was the only company that did that. He saw a need when he first got into the mortgage business here for some type of an automated type of system keeping, record keeping. And he did that. He was the only one doing it. And that was it. And it's still the best of its kind in the world as far as I know. They're still using that same application. So I think he'll be best remembered for that and his philanthropic, both of them will, for that, and what they've given back to the community. I have words for a lot of reasons, some of which I mentioned, whether it's the nostalgia back to my childhood and our families, the closeness of our families, or my career with Computer Power and the subsequent organizations. I cannot find the words to express my admiration and affection for either one of them. Now, I've known Ann obviously longer than I've known David, and David I always knew from a more of a work, pragmatic perspective. But Ann is very dear to my heart, and of course, Ruth, my godmother, was. I don't want to get too emotional about it, but I'm very fond of them because we lost our parents young, and they were just part of that. And when you try to go back, when I try to go back and think about all of that, the Currys and the Hicks are all part of that. I remember a friend of mine who we email, he was one of David's main lieutenants. He was a sales guy who was there at Computer Power he had been there for some time. And Howard was great. It's Howard Griffin. David knows Howard. And I remember Howard telling us, David would go on sales calls with Howard, and one time they were somewhere driving and they had a flat tire. And Howard said they looked at each other like, okay, who's going to be changing this tire? And David says, Howard, get out and change the tire. I don't change tires. But that was David. David was not of a mechanical bent, so to speak, on such matters. I wish what they probably want, which is what all loving parents want, is success for their children and their grandchildren, and to know that they've provided a springboard for that, whether it's emotional, financial, or whatever, work ethic, whatever. They want what we all want for our children. And I will tell you one thing. My son got married a couple of months ago. And of course, Ann and David were invited. And when the wedding was over and we were walking out of the church, I saw both of them there. And I had not seen David out for a while. And Ann reached out and grabbed my hand as I walked by. And I'll just never forget that. That just says everything to me.
When I met David, I knew immediately that he knew everything about what he wanted to do and how to do it. And his mind was I always knew that he was thinking probably 10 steps ahead of everybody else. I would ask him a question, and not only would he answer it, he would explain more about it. And I always had the sense that he was just smarter than everybody else in the room. But I know I met him when he was with Computer Power. And I especially got to know him when he was building the Computer Power headquarters on Riverside, because not a lot had been built on Riverside Avenue in that area. And he had a vision to recreate the waterfront there with that building. And it was just fun to watch him create. It's always fun to watch David Hicks create, whatever it is. He's very smart. He's efficient in his words. He's very direct. When I interviewed him for a profile and for a presentation on the radio, he was probably one of the briefest interviews because he's very economical in his words. He knows what he wants to say, he knows how to say it, and he is not going to waste any more time on extraneous things. And that's the trait that I always got from him, that he was very efficient, very smart, very directed, very focused. I just always admired him because he was always focused, he was always direct, he was always very, very smart. I always knew that no matter what he said, there was probably so much more beneath the surface of what he knew. I always felt like I always wanted to understand more, and I always knew he understood everything. I believe some of his programs, or many of his programs, are still in use. It has really withstood not only the test of time, but extremely successful, because Computer Power then became Alltel. Alltel then became well known in Jacksonville because it supported the stadium. It became Alltel Stadium when the Jaguars first started playing there. And then that eventually became the Fidelity set of companies, huge employer in town, huge. So from David's first germ of an idea, he developed essentially what is the Fidelity National campus in Jacksonville. Thousands of jobs, and it's all him. Very generous, very philanthropic, very supportive of scholarships and of housing opportunities for people and for students who need them. They're very giving, and people know that, and people understand that. He was just so focused on what he was going to do. I don't know of any, you'd have to ask somebody else about the quirks, because as a reporter, I was always seeking information from him, and he was always providing information. The newspaper, he always provided very good quotes, very efficient quotes, to the point. Not a lot of editing was needed because he said what needed to be said and nothing more, nothing less, but nothing more. And so he was always on point. He always helped make the story better. When it was a story, of course, about his company, he was very helpful in explaining what we reporters probably didn't know, and he was very patient in explaining about the company. On our most recent interview on the radio, it was just a lot of fun. We sat in a studio and we just talked. And of course we had the earphones and the microphones, and it was just fun to be in the room with him and hear him reminisce about his life and his business and his outlook on life. And I felt that it was really a gift that I was able to do that. I asked him what his advice was to his grandchildren. And he said, live your own life. And I thought about it, and it was very brief and very succinct, but it made a lot of sense because that's what he did. He lived his own life, and he continues to live his own life. He did inspire people. I know people who worked with him who continue to talk about how he led them to live their own life. When they had an opportunity he would help them achieve their goals, and they're very loyal to him, very loyal. He always had a vision of where he wanted to be, whether it was his life, his personal life, with his philanthropy, or whether it was his company. He was always thinking ahead of everybody else and ahead of the market. He had the vision, and he was able to drive the company to that vision, and it was extraordinarily successful. And I think people like that, because a lot of people, I don't think, can create a vision like he does, or they may not have the confidence to create a vision. And when they see a leader like David, they follow him because they know he knows where he's going and they want to go to. I think they just completely complement each other. They are just, two halves of a very, very nice whole. They have, I believe, the vision together of how to make Jacksonville better. I know that, Ann had a lot of the vision for some of the scholarships and for some of the other events and efforts. And when she presented those to David, David, of course, saw the value in it because, she is very much of a visionary herself. She is very nice, very elegant, very sophisticated, very smart. And people like to be with her, and they appreciate Ann. People in town appreciate Ann Hicks. They appreciate David Hicks, but the people in town also appreciate what Ann brings to the city. And she brings a lot to the city. She's a native of Jacksonville, as I understand it, so she knows the city very, very well. And David, I believe, grew up in the Northeast, and he came here because of her. And so, that was nice of her to do that, and it was nice of him to do that. There are awards in Jacksonville given by the Times-Union called the Eve Awards, and they're very distinguished awards. And Ann has won several of those, as I believe. I probably do the research on it, but I believe she might have been, one of the top Eve Award, Eve of the Decade, and you'll have to do the research. But it was a very nice award, and I remember when she accepted it, and I was just so touched by her speech because she was very quiet and just very direct and very nice about it. She didn't give a long speech. She talked about what she could help the community achieve. Not what she achieved, but what she helped the community achieve. She always puts the community above everything. David and Ann Hicks are very humble, yes. They do have their names on a lot of buildings, but I'm not sure they always wanted their names on the buildings. I think that because the people who had, for instance, their name I know is on buildings at UNF, and they love to support UNF. I don't think they would ask for their name to be on a building. I really don't. I think that they would accept, like they did, they accept it, but I don't think they go around and ask for that. I think they just want to go around and help the community. I think they want to provide the scholarships for the students who need them. I think they want to provide housing for people who need it. And as David led the housing authority for a long time, he just wants to make it work. He just wants to make the city work. I don't think it's their name on a building that really drives them. I think it's what they have achieved through helping other people, and that's what they want. That's all they want. I would think the stories in the newspaper that I worked at the Times-Union for 30 years, and so the stories in the newspaper, there have been a lot of stories about David's company, but I know that we had a reporter who really wanted to do a personal profile of David Hicks, and he just wasn't able to get a whole lot of information out of David Hicks for that story. And he ended up doing a really nice story, a really good, in-depth story about David Hicks, but I'm not sure David wanted that story done. And it was a good story. I think his legacy will be that he was a very smart businessman who had a vision, who created a lot of jobs, who launched a lot of careers, who was very inventive, who was way ahead of his time with technology. And I think people will remember that. One of the most memorable stories was just how David Hicks envisioned and built the building along Riverside Avenue that really became the impetus for the campus that is now Fidelity National Financial. And at the time, there wasn't much, if any, development along Riverside Avenue in that area. So when he built that building, it really started the resurgence along Riverside Avenue, which is now amazing. It's an amazing place. But doing that story and having David outline his vision, this is what he saw, this is why he wanted the building there, this is what he thought it could be, was very enlightening, because he was taking something that didn't exist. He saw what it could be, and he made it happen. And that's emblematic of what he does with his businesses and with everything else. He sees the opportunity, he sees the need, he figures out how to get it done, creates the template, creates the plan, and does it, carries through. And I think that's what I remember most about that whole story, was how he did that. I just wish people knew more about what David and Ann Hicks have done for the community. And I really wish more people would know David Hicks's legacy in business in the city, because he is quiet and he is humble and he is behind the scenes. He's not out there as much as some other people might be. And I think people would really benefit from knowing more about him. They really would, because he really is he really has a legacy in Jacksonville. And I hope that people appreciate that. The time and luxury of doing what they want to do in the community, I believe that they have probably an endless pool of ideas on what they want to do, but I do know that they focus on those two areas specifically. And I hope that they're very, very happy in pursuing those dreams. You know, I've covered business in Jacksonville for almost 40 years. And I would say that David Hicks probably was one of the most fun people to interview, because I knew he would answer the question. He would answer it straight. He would answer it briefly, but efficiently. He would tell me what I needed to know, explain to me what I needed to know, and I always knew that I would come away with what I needed to know. He was very good at explanation, and I believe when I first started interviewing him, I was very young, and I think he took pity on me to say, you know, I think I need to help this young reporter learn a few things. And so he was very patient with me, and I will always appreciate that. I'll always appreciate that. Well, you know, having reported for 40 years, I've covered a lot of stories and a lot of different people, a lot of different things. And I always enjoyed it when it circled back and I could talk with David Hicks. It was a bright spot. It always was, because I didn't get a lot of opportunities to talk with him as the years passed. But whenever I did, I enjoyed it, and I always looked forward to it. When I called and asked him if we could do the interview, he agreed. I was very, very happy with that. You know, some people don't like to sit in a radio booth and talk for 30 minutes. And he was great. We had a good time. We had a good time. You know what it's like with the business, and he enjoyed it. And I did too. I enjoyed it more than he did, I'm sure.